Justin, if you can hear this.
Yeah, I'm on the City of Durango YouTube.
Kind of, sort of. I talked to Kevin. He said they had 4 tables up. So,
Oh,
yes.
I see it.
Justin, if you can hear this.
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah, I'm on the City of Durango YouTube.
Kind of, sort of. I talked to Kevin. All right. Can you say something else? We're getting some feedback loops in here.
Sure. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Test.
What's up, Scott? Yeah, doing stuff. Yeah.
Testing.
You're good, Justin.
Okay. And I see the YouTube stream too, by the way.
Yeah. Did I miss the meeting? Okay. Okay.
How's it going, sir? How are you doing? Doing well. How's yourself? Doing okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's the return.
No, it was really just when to send out the news release.
I haven't since I've been here.
And put on social media in terms of the actual mechanics. I was going to defer to you guys.
Hope it works.
Sorry, I don't mean to be short with you. I'm just trying to set up a study session. Get some Google.
Things are good. Things are good. Yourself. All right. Good deal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Trying to get ready.
All right.
For some meetings next weekend. Oh, always come to. You know how they sit?
Kevin said they could have 2, 4, 6, 8. He was saying plan for 8.
You know, as far as like we bring their nameplates down.
I didn't get to that level of detail. We can though, but he said he wasn't sure what he's going to do for this, and it's all free for all.
Where does the presenter sit?
Any place they want. Because
2, 4, 6. There's 5 of us. Oh, there's 6 of us.
hang on a second. I don't have the map.
Was Kevin in his office or not?
He was at home.
So I'm assuming then that the presenter is on this side right here.
Well, whoever's going to present is going to need a keyboard. They're going to need to look at the screen. So they're looking at a PowerPoint. So I would, wherever is going to be most comfortable for them looking at.
Well, I'd assume Mayor Pro Tem, Council, me, Ben, or me and Faye, and then whoever's there, right?
I want to say yes. Hey, is there any possibility you could map a drive from your location to me at the council chambers? PC number is 22005. I need the communications drive, which on my desk is the X drive, but I know it depends.
Give this a shot. See, grab Sorry.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't paying attention.
That's my fault.
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Hey, Devin. Is your show in the S-Drive presentations that you're gonna work off of?
Sure is. You want to pull it up?
Yeah, because I'm thinking is want to have you just use this table because I guess it'll be like 2 hours long.
I go down there. Wherever I want. Where's it going? It's like not open.
Oh, sorry. Hang on. Sorry, Justin. I was asking Devin at the same time. I didn't realize it was Jack.
But he's in here right
Yeah.
now. Yeah, I'll come back.
Thanks.
Oh.
And still attending. I've been working on this for like 2 weeks. Okay, thank you. Have a good day.
Isn't it showing?
Damn, you're good.
There it is. In council chamber? Huh. This was only, I don't know, but yeah, I see it now. I'm all set. Cool. All right, thanks.
It might be like no center table. There was another time where there's this thing where they had this V with one table and that helped them look at each other, but this will work.
This is so, it's in the spirit.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
I mean, maybe the one difference might be that if you lost that table and had someone sitting up there, because then you'd have a circle rather than 3 and 2. Because you would probably be up here too.
Yeah, I'm just trying to, because there's 4 of us. And I guess the thing's about the screens, right? Can everybody see?
This one's, yeah, and this, well, if you're sitting, yeah, because if you're sitting, this one, you got that one, this one, you eat that. Both of them, on that side, it's this one.
Gotcha. And then what about this side in the front?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they're all working.
Gotcha.
seems to be.
Would it be better to pull it all out this way a little bit more, so you get back to this meeting?
Well, then you start losing that screen.
So once he gets done playing, when you
Do
have
these
your
screens turn?
PowerPoint thing, you'll
No,
see 2 presentations,
Well,
one's budget and one's yours.
probably.
Like where this, you just turn it just a little bit.
It'll appear widescreen, but then you have to go into Zoom and share your screen, because otherwise people at home can't see.
Right.
So you have to share it, you have to show it here and then share it.
Does Tom, like, do you log in the Zoom?
He's already logged in, he does all that. And here's my thing, are you presenting? Share your screen in Zoom. We leave notes everywhere because that's what we do.
Yeah.
I don't know, it seems to me like it's fine.
Hey, do I have to reboot this? It's not showing up.
I'm sure that's not OSHA approved.
I know.
Just saying.
I think.
Oh, I would put these people, I would put the councils all over here and let this be where the staff sits.
Okay.
I mean, that's, seems to, then they're looking at each other,
Yeah, actually, that's the next,
so the councils can remember who each of them are. I mean, we typically didn't even put those out in the past.
Okay, gotcha. I didn't know.
Because then they just come in, it's a little more informal, you know. Whatever works for everybody.
We'll just leave it there. If they want to leave them, they can.
I have a feeling maybe the mayor shows up and has another idea
For
too,
sure.
so.
So can you see if you're on Melissa's side?
Yeah, I mean, you can see both of these screens on some level.
Never mind.
So that YouTube thumbnail should be showing up. PDQ. Should get
How's it going?
Sessions is Devin here?
Thanks for listening to some feedback.
Do you know Faye,
Mhm.
one? Devin, one, sure, wants the strategic operation plan.
It's already open.
Yeah, and so now that it's got to, it's like, especially with these two items, I think it's a good time to try it. Yeah, for sure.
Housing is useless and the strategic
Wow,
plan.
that's what I'm so keen too.
So there. Here, what's in here, so swap here and presenter view. So now, do you see full screen strategic plan review 2020? Okay, great. And one of the things I may have, so you're on this side. On the,
Guess you can still see.
on the YouTube, is that?
Yeah. It's a little slanted, but it's not. Hey, dude.
Hello.
How's it going?
Hi, how are you?
Doing well. We're gonna try this, if that's okay with y'all.
Oh, down there.
Down here,
Okay.
going back. We have two
Some elbows. Sounds great.
longer presentations. I don't know the seating arrangement. I don't know how. I'm trying to figure out how this was.
Yeah, we did basically the same setup before, but without the middle table because we didn't have to have the mics up.
Yeah.
That's pretty close to what we used to do.
Okay.
The one time I think it happened in
I
person.
don't care.
Really.
Whatever.
As soon as I get into it.
It is super fast.
Trying something new. Well, trying something new that was old.
Okay.
This is how it was before, so
Yeah.
we're just like, let's see if it works. And if it does, we can continue to do it this way. Have maybe better discussions.
I was gonna say, I feel like this is more conducive.
Study sessions, yeah.
Study session.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Let's talk.
Yeah,
Try
let's
to be
talk
close
and
to each other
chat.
and like be on the same level. I need
Do you guys know?
Just that's how long I've done study sessions.
Down here. Figure whoever's presenting can be next to me.
It does, and like us like looking down on you, like.
And I can take your notes.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
Sorry,
Hi,
I was in the middle of it. So
you
you.
get anybody over here just for
They'll probably need the mouse too, I would think.
since I haven't had to do this in person yet.
So what were you mentioning? Keyboard.
I would bet they will need both the keyboard and the mouse, but hey, what do I know?
So you're gonna be down there at the table and then.
But I can come up here and at least open this.
Well, they're wireless, so you could take it over there and do
Yeah,
it based on the
actually,
screen and
but-
pretend it's your computer screen.
Let's do it.
Yeah, so.
Let's
if
pretend it's your
Devin-
computer screen,
if Devin
but it's a
had just-
TV.
If Devin had just ended,
Hers.
hers, what you'd want to do is, you click back on this.
If I can see that far, but I can put my glasses on.
You can look right there next to you
Okay.
on the bigger TV, if that helps,
Oh, right.
or not. Just options, Eva.
We got two screens is what's going on, even though we only got one.
Oh, oh yeah, there you go. That's exciting, you know.
See the problems I can.
So all day yesterday, and I need to plug in my computer, so I'm gonna switch.
Devin's gonna do
over
some
real
stuff.
quick. Oh, just
So when
kidding.
you get this,
Oh, wait, it's other side.
what you will do is click on share screen.
Oh.
And then you should see yours queued up.
Over here. Yeah, okay, so I'm on sure. So I can.
Then you wanna.
It was the other way around, which made your
Oh.
ledge on the other side.
Right.
A little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Is Olivier not here?
No, he's in Ecuador.
Isn't that Tom's water bottle?
It is.
It is.
Tom's not presenting strategic plan unless you wanted to.
He can do it, he's got it.
It's got the word plan and it's very strategic.
And I'm done. Thank you.
And for 2022, you can tell it says right there.
And your on-air light's still on.
What?
The on-air light's still on.
Yeah, I have to wait till that melts. It's like,
It's pretty close.
that is actually how I know today. Thank you. Because I know when I think that.
Yeah, it does look like it's melting.
Oh, so then if I'm sitting down. Then we're all laying out.
Yeah, you'll be, I
Got
think, I'm
it.
guessing right here. with that
Right.
piece.
Okay.
So I think
Okay.
it's,
Yeah, so you just, yeah, it's the same thing. You're just, instead of looking at that monitor, you're looking at that screen.
Sure.
And you just hit, and you can hit enter and it goes to the next slide,
We'll go to the next slide.
and the next slide, and the next slide, and the next slide.
You know, we do this so many times, but when you're thinking about presenting it, it's funny how it shuts down. You know, it's like, I've done this a lot, but I. Jumping.
Oh, yeah, not a problem.
Not going on. So thank you for the trial. That's great. Okay.
I haven't been able to Zoom in my office. Yeah.
It's a different feel. I did try one myself.
gotcha.
Looking good, feeling good.
Just let me vibe. And it's almost. Nice. Oh, that's.
You did a really nice job. This is nice.
That's good. Enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Did you hear that?
No, just kind of sang with the beach and everything else, for sure.
Hey, Scott.
Took my best shot at seating for this.
Yeah, at least 10
So
minutes.
just give it a shot.
Awesome. Although we usually don't ever put our meetings up
Gotcha.
because we just sit wherever we feel like it. Hello, Jessica, how are
Hi,
you?
I'm good. How are you?
This is awesome to be back where it's kind of like a group conversation instead of a. I love
I agree. Do I need
Well.
I got tea. I lost my voice this weekend, screaming for my children.
Hockey?
No lacrosse.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Here in town or?
We were in Grand Junction.
Oh, okay.
Yes, and Connor played varsity and JV,
Oh, wow.
started both, and so there's a lot of extra games, yelling, and lost my voice, and so I'm hoping my honey tea helps. So I don't get,
That'll help.
yeah.
How are you? You're good.
Yeah, so you guys, they're doing well in sports. Yes, they're always been like little sporty kids.
Good.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. It is strong out there.
A three. Miss.
Kevin, hi, how are you?
Good.
And you hear us coming through YouTube?
And you did leave it on line 3, right? Okay. Yeah. Yeah, but it is on line 3, so if there's a problem, it's probably because it's on line 3.
Well, thank you for your help.
Yeah,
I know.
Exactly.
And it's- Yeah.
yeah,
like,
see what happens,
sure.
but just so we have it in our head that that's where it's at now, I think.
For this meeting, it's just,
Yeah.
When Jim came in the door Friday night. He went to talk to I said, no, I need.
New format.
I'm trying to go back to the old format.
I've been ready. That's cool.
See how it works, yeah, sure.
We're not.
I will have.
No, no, it's good.
Good.
Unless-
I think it's on YouTube, Tom said.
Yeah, oh yeah,
And then-
Yes.
Hi. Okay,
That I want to make sure to return. Will
Sure.
you send me an email confirmation?
absolutely, absolutely.
Because I never use it as.
So this is the original one you had?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yep. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Plug it in.
Yeah.
You'll be able to get access to that, right? 'Cause I don't even know.
I'm sure IT can. Yeah,
Or something. I don't know.
IT will figure it out.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I took it to my best friend's cat one night to the vet for her because she had to work. And she's like,
Sure, absolutely. Feel free to come anytime.
no, and I like called her and she's like, I can't do this.
Catching the vibe.
What in the world? Situational awareness. I sobbed the entire.
Is that what it is? Is that situational awareness?
Yes,
It's like, I don't think I should do this.
This might be a bad idea.
So glad I could point that out for you.
Oh, okay.
And I was like, when I key my mic, it shows on my. Because I wasn't here.
I'm just like with you. And I like the budget.
Okay. Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, she brought me all the documents. I haven't had a chance to look at them and go through them. But oh, okay.
I need to refer back to something I have.
So all of them came back.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I just, yeah, I'll keep an eye on it.
Hey, Kim.
Hello. Great.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, shoot, I forgot this.
Sure. Gotcha. Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so it's a hard thing. First time I did it, yeah, I was and I said this time I was and I was able to pull it off. It was really, but I was ready. And then we went to the desert.
Get away. Yeah, I love it. That's good. I know, I love those like 5-week months. It's like every weekend or stuff.
Chicago.
No, in Montrose, Denver, just like little.
Yeah.
It's so fast.
So I told Jose that we don't have to have names of things for this. We can say.
Oh, yeah, no. Oh, without.
But otherwise,
It's nice to be back.
I know, that's what I said. It's awesome.
Does the chief smell or something there? God, you're like leaving the chief back there by himself. Oh, to someone else. See where you fall in line.
So we can sell. I need the spirit.
That's it?
No, I mean,
It's like rabbit? You're like a rabbit.
I did have a salad. Some eggs.
I've been running around, I've had Cheez-Its and whatever's in my kid's snack bag.
Definitely been to Cheez-Its many times.
What do I have back there?
Hello.
Hi. Hi.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Good. Running around. You were
Yes.
people. Sometimes, you know, busy lives everybody has. Now that we're over that.
I know.
Kind of. So you started pickleball. I've been watching it and it's It's so fun. And there's competitive people out there, but I met the nicest people too, just so nice. I really like the setup.
You're looking at me like I have the answer. I don't know the answer. but-
I've seen it at the rec center.
I don't know if I've seen it, yeah.
Very inclusive, really nice, like, it's a really neat deal. I've been actually filtered that, it's really impressive what they've done. I like their setup, rec center, pickleball rec center, just the draw.
I just turn the mics on.
They've got like beginner days, it's really
It's just-
nice. Hit your face when you're starting, yeah, you know what I mean? Because you could, you're 6 feet apart.
So, I mean, if I was starting, I'd whack it at your face.
Yeah, it wouldn't matter whether it was intentional or not. right?
But then there's other people, like my girlfriend, who gets really mad at people like that because it's not the nature of the game.
Right, it's just supposed to be fun.
Yeah, that like, it's more of a dink game, like you're supposed, like really good players will dink it. Like in really good placement, so that you can't
Like
get
tennis.
Yeah. Is the ball soft?
Okay,
It's a
okay, you guys.
All right. Our new fun game.
Welcome to the Durango City Council study session for April 5th, 2022. And I almost said 1922. It is 2/17 and our theme is affordability and economic opportunity. Do we have any future new business items?
Yes.
I have 3. And I'm sorry I didn't give them to you guys anything else in the notes because they just kind of. One is
No, we don't ever do it.
Student sessions, I don't remember.
Well, we'll just say that
Roll
Mayor
call.
Pro Tem Noseworthy, Councilor Buell, Councilor Youssef, and Mayor Baxter are in attendance, as well as Jose Madrigal and Devin Schmidt. I almost said Smith. It's a tough day.
It's holiday.
I've been on holiday. I can't remember what to do.
Councilor
Okay,
Bosman's absent.
yes.
Okay,
He said he won't be here all day.
all day. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
I have 3 things I'd like to look at. I'm intrigued by the rate of choice vote.
Yeah.
And the process of that. And, you know, we got the letter from Dick White, and then I've heard from others, I don't know about you guys, about would it even be possible to do that in the 2023 city council elections? What would that take? So I'd actually like to learn more about what that would take as a possibility of doing it.
Well, I think we have to discuss whether or not it's something we want to do,
Right,
and then discuss how it might happen.
right. That's what I was thinking is I just want to, I would like us to discuss it in a formal, you know, in an organized manner, what would be involved, the benefits. There was a lecture up at Lifelong Learning where the professor of politics talked about that. So that might be something also that people want to walk or watch or have him help with the discussion. But I'd like a discussion.
I would absolutely support that. I would like to learn more about it. I saw the article, was it? The Dick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not wrote, but set forwarded.
Set forward, okay.
Forwarded.
Oh, forwarded it, thank you,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
And I would be, it looked like there's many different complications around it that I want to learn more about too, but it sounded interesting.
So right now it's what, Fort Collins and somewhere else was.
Boulder.
Boulder probably.
I guess I did.
Do we know if there's any others? That's the only article.
How
I
many
read.
did it, how many did it say? I thought it said like 5.
Yeah.
Had accepted,
States?
5 municipalities had gone to rate book. Okay, that's just off the top of my head from a very quick perusal
Right.
of that
Article,
article, but that's what I feel. So several had.
Yeah.
But it did seem like there were some good advantages to it.
I
I'm
think some
interested in
more.
learning more.
Yeah.
Me too.
So that's 3.
Yeah, I'd be interested in learning more, and I think that from CML's viewpoint, it would be good for us to hear from us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, good point. So maybe in a study session, is that what you're recommending?
And it may be that you would bring in someone like this, the professor who talked about it. And, you know, I I just have friends in Maine who went through that process in the 2020 election, and they were really pleased with the ability to vote, in that way. So it's just interesting.
And so just to follow up on that request too, I think that what you also brought up, which is an interesting thing, is would it and could it be viable for the upcoming elections?
I mean, that's the only thing we really would have jurisdiction over.
That's right.
So
2023.
2023, yeah, would it be, what's involved, and does
sure.
it make sense to consider that? And this is the second of three. Where is Allison? There she is. Okay, I promised to bring this up. And I'll talk about the IAB meeting in more detail on the reports session later tonight, but we have talked about the rate study and having a rate study for, and
The rate study.
for water, in particular for water. And Jared has raised the point that we really need council to kind of set the overarching priorities before they design that RFP. I mean, you could go either way. They could, the IAB could give us some guidelines, but they're going to think in terms of what's the business case. And we as counselors might be thinking in terms of, is affordability a priority to us as opposed to just revenue? So one of the things I would like to suggest is that I think we as a council need to have a discussion about what we want with our rate structure for water that can help guide how they write that RFP. And if I've missed anything, Allison, I'd like to give her just a chance, if I've missed anything.
I think you covered it real clearly, and the idea being that you're more philosophical, citywide, you would be a great starting point for us. And then if we can look at the more technical intricacies of how to structure the rate to support that philosophy.
And there is some urgency with that for us to sit as a council and discuss it, because we really need to get that RFP then written, bid upon, get that information back all in time to affect the budget for 2023, what we're looking at. So that's a study session I'd like to request, and I'd like to put a bit of a urgency to that.
Well, I understand that, but on the other hand, the budget can be changed, and it doesn't have to come through in September or October. It could the revised in December could, or it could be with caveats like we did with the Lake Night Horse pipeline. Because really, I think the criteria is to get it right and to do it for when our current rate structure, the lowered rates, are expiring, so that we have that in place by that time. I think the budget is something that we can work with and adjust and change, and I would rather not rush through a process that comes out being not the process we wish we'd ended up with.
I can see that. I'm just hoping that we're not looking at a July study session as opposed to maybe something in May or June. That's what I'm sure that it into that calendar.
My thought on that too is I would support study session. For me, I really want to get a handle on the capital improvement projects around the need for water, to understand how that, and upgrade projects or maintenance projects that staff tells us are needed in order to maintain and sustain, obviously, a quality water system. So I kind of feel like I need to have that information in order to provide high level guidance, philosophical guidance on rates. I need to understand what our needs are as a community.
So the plan for that is possibly the CIPs will be discussed at the next IAB meeting, which will be the 4th or so of May, or 3rd, whatever that first Monday is. And then conceivably, I think there would be some back and forth, maybe in early June, it will come to the council from a scheduling. So again, I'm just trying to keep those things moving so that the staff also has what they need. From what I hear as a liaison.
So if we could get updated on that
CIPs.
and the needs from the staff perspective, from what the staff, the expert, our staff is telling us that they need for that, then it would help us, I think, in providing that. So maybe we just stage them that way. Yeah.
That sounds really great. The last thing I have is on the lodger's tax, and I appreciate Tom sending that clarification clarification. That's very helpful on the law that the governor signed into being. But I also think that, you know, we have to put a ballot, a measure in the November ballot, and the November election to deal with the significant the significant collection that we exceeded what we had projected.
With Tabor collections.
Yeah, and I actually think there's always a time to sit back and say, is this really still in the best interest? You know, we made decisions a year and a half, a year and a quarter ago, when we were still early in the pandemic. We didn't know what sales tax was going to look like. We didn't know how great our budget was going to be looking. And maybe 55% is still not what's necessary anymore, particularly given the fact that other communities now have the option to use some of that money for workforce housing, for daycare, for other things. And so I would like to ask to have at least a discussion among ourselves in a study session of, is this still appropriate, necessary, desired, or are there some other ways we want to think about that? And then as we think about that ballot language, what that might look like.
I think I agree with you, because after that ballot initiative passed and time moved on and things changed, I wondered if maybe we couldn't have thought about it in a different way and requested of the community a different possibility of split of percentages or whatever that would be more long-term focused on the community itself and not quite as much on tourism. I think having that kind of a conversation is reasonable if our intention, you know, is to kind of determine if we want to do something, because I know there's that one in November, but we could also do it again in April. We don't have to rush it, but I think that it's a good idea to talk about that, because I know the community's talking about it, and now that article's been in the paper and it wasn't clear that this affects the county specifically and the changes they can enact doesn't affect the city, because we've always had this capability. I think that wouldn't be a bad conversation.
I'll also add, you know, I had a conversation with one of the county commissioners on Monday, and it was Matt Sullivan, he was speaking as one county commissioner. He said, you know, revenue is almost doubled, and it's all of that is now going into marketing, nothing else for that. And he's like, he's getting pressure. Do you really need that much money going into this one item? And I look at everything from not only workforce housing or childcare and other things, but, you know, could we change the bus schedule so that the transit runs more frequently? Could we use this for upgrading the sidewalks on Main Avenue? I mean, what are that could be used other than just marketing, very narrowly defined, and tourism, as opposed to your point, looking out for the impacts of tourism on the community.
So you want to have a study session?
I do.
And probably I would suggest you probably want it sooner than later again, because if this is something that we're talking about a ballot, it should potentially work.
If it's November, it's really good.
But a couple thoughts. We made the decision of what ballot language would go on, but then the community decided, and it was close. But you know, the community decided, we didn't decide, which was, you know, and so just as I think through it in my mind, but at the same time, I am hearing similar things, and I'd be willing to have a conversation.
Thank you. And I think things have changed from a year and a half ago. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree. Things have changed from a year and a half ago. I'd be interested to make sure that like all the groups that were involved in pushing the lodger's tax and were heard in some way. I don't know if they're part of the study session or how that works, because it was like the first time that like all the groups were like on board with the language that went into this ballot. And we want to make sure that even though we maybe don't want as much going into marketing, I mean, that's,
Yeah.
you know, a big supporter and a big push to get that got this passed was for in a sense. And so like just respecting and honoring what we originally did, and then also like, can we make it better? And I mean, that's a potential. We don't have any for workforce housing. We don't have any, and so there is a potential to make it better, especially with the amount that we're collecting. But I would be really cognizant and I would just appreciate hearing all the.
That's a really good point. How do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we do that? I think
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
really, really important point.
And I would raise the point that, yes, all the groups that had a self-interest came
Sure.
together, right? They all had a self-interest, but the groups that like wanted workforce housing or wanted daycare or wanted transit, they weren't invited to the table.
Yeah.
You know, so that's.
But how do we
too.
get them all to the table? Like, it is important.
Well, I think that's where we might talk about, and I'm gonna look also, we might talk about, well, what's important to us. And I'll give an example, just, okay, we've got money, ARPA money for housing, but that runs out. Is this a way to help? And to your point, yes, I'm not saying eliminate that, but I'm saying that you may not need $2 or $2.5 or $3 million going into marketing tourism.
Right.
You know, and that may be what you're collecting.
I'd be also interested to see like how other communities of our like size and demographic divvy up theirs, just so, you know, just for
And
more interest in education for me.
but
She has Jessica has a really good point though, I think, and I think that maybe there's a way through some type of public process where we could hear from the various stakeholders
I
and
think
have
that's
that
good.
opportunity, because I would be very interested in that.
Does the lodging community think that 2 million is plenty, or, and that, you know, they agree,
Yeah.
or do they, you know, do they think that 4 million is what they need, or, you know, I mean, I don't know the
Yeah,
answer to
I-
that, and I know, but like, I would be interested to hear that, and then also what others are doing with.
So we
their
do have to be
budgets.
careful here, because I think that what we would have been potentially doing is asking staff.
Yeah.
To, you know, putting on their plate a potential another public process. They have quite a few of those going on right now. So any thoughts from staff before we just add line items?
or can it go into some of your survey discussions?
I think it can go into a few different places, but we might want to start with just the first general discussion to kind of educate, kind of marketing, what's available, what might be some of the current trends, and then kind of get some ideas from the council of some of the other opportunities and uses that we may want to take a look at, and then kind of then begin working into a public process of including some of those parts into it, but kind of seeing it in stages and steps to go through, still understanding that there's a November target that might be something we want to take a look at, but I think that this discussion is going to take more than just one discussion.
Yeah, okay. And I will say, we have to, it's my understanding, we have to put on the ballot permission to use the excess of funds, the funds that were collected over and beyond what we said, so that we have to put something on the ballot. It may not be that, it could even be that we don't want to use those funds for additional tourism, but we have to put something on the ballot.
I mean, if that is also that has to go on in November.
I don't think it has to, but I think that's the target date that was.
I mean, if we're doing that, we might as well hopefully get our ducks in a row and do everything at one time, just because that makes sense, rather than going back out again.
Well, on the Tabor thing, though, there's a time limit
Yeah.
to when you have to do that, and I'm not certain how that falls in there. So there was that, and also the concept of here we are collecting this money and we're not doing anything about it. So
I feel like Dirk said it was the April of 2022 when we were in our session, but I don't know. for sure.
Yeah, I think we needed permission to use as of January 2020. But we can get that resolved.
Yeah.
But there's a possibility that it really has to happen.
So that your thought and Matt Salko's thought and yours, I think the absolute dollars is really key here, because originally we hadn't anticipated that the actual dollars, you know, would be as significantly much larger than they were. And we have a lot more money coming in. And I absolutely agree, we need to look at that reallocation, because I don't think that that was our intention, was to fund it to a tune of 2 million or 1.8 or whatever. The intention was to give enough money to the marketing industry to market us in the right way, but not necessarily significantly more than what they actually needed, and not to put that back into the community. So I absolutely agree with that. And I think that the, I need to start writing this down because I forget what I was going to say. I think that the communication is really key. And, oh, I know what it was, to your point about the community voting for it. I agree that they voted for it and they passed it, but what concerns me most, and what we got a lot of, and still get information on and pushback on, is that it wasn't a large majority by any means. It was almost 50-50, it was like 48-52. And so that means that there's a significant, if you look at 1,000 people, that means 480 were not so happy about it and 520 were. And so there's a significant portion of our community that I don't think it was the lodger's tax increase per se. I think it was the allocation of it that they were mostly concerned about. So I'm really interested in addressing those.
So it sounds like we have consensus, complete consensus on having a discussion around this.
But we'll start. Yeah, your advice. How to go forward with that.
Yeah, because we need to be able to, we should actually be agreed on we probably have to actually make a decision to move forward in some way. Not just give direction.
And to your point, Melissa, about getting community feedback, that's
We'll
right.
address it,
We have
yeah.
the discussion and then we, both your points, and then we find a way to maybe not necessarily bring everyone to the table, though, those like the housing, and but at least to have their input into it.
It would be great.
Because
That would be helpful.
it's a significant resource for the community, and I appreciate you guys being willing to reconsider it.
So the other thing we might want to add into this is do we do a mixed question? So do we ask them, do you want to put 50% into this, 25 this, and 25 this? Or do you want to put 75 here and 25 here? Or do we also consider that we give them the option of choosing what relative ratios they support versus only one option?
And I think that's part of our discussion.
And I don't know if that's the right answer, but not to lose sight of the fact that we don't have to put this in just one way, or you could say, if we did this. So it's kind of like that thing where if we weren't going to be spending money on streets, but we'd be spending money on this, would you vote for that? But if we only cut streets by 50%, and then this, because it makes them think about the trade-offs, because that's what we're looking at here, are trade-offs.
Yeah, thank you guys. That's my point, thank you.
Anybody else have future agenda items? How about comments on our future, I'm sorry, that was future new business, on our future agendas? One we got for the 19th.
My only, I guess, question was, we had originally talked about getting the discussion in for, and before, because we have a meeting on May 2nd. And I don't,
Getting a
sorry,
discussion is what?
self-app, sorry, you saw, I knew you knew what I was talking about. Just because they want some direction on where they're going for the year and what council wants to see them do. We can't, it's not like a 911 or anything, but it would be very helpful.
Apologies, that was my overlook. Completely slipped my mind, though it was on there. We can definitely find room at the next.
I literally just looked at it right now, the agenda, so.
Yeah, we have room there. That was one that was floating, and we'll definitely place it on.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
All right, so any other future agenda items? Okay.
Well, I can tell you that, again, this will come in. Future agenda, the IAB will look at the stormwater master plan probably in the May meeting, which means it would probably be coming to council by the June meeting. Probably and I didn't ask for a question, but just as you think about that, they're going to be looking at as the third one, and then that's how we start thinking about how big is that effort, what is it going to cost, and how we're going to pay for it. So that may be coming down the pipe.
For late nights.
No,
For the stormwater management.
Stormwater.
which always gets pushed off to the back burner, but
No, but we are way back.
Do we have the third, Kevin, do we have the third phase of our stormwater management plan?
That's what they're working on.
they work on.
Okay.
Allison is hoping at yesterday's meeting, it's going to be on the May IAB agenda. We felt like looking at it on a Monday and us looking at it on Tuesday didn't give them a chance to really digest it. So it would be probably the earliest is coming to us in June, maybe before May.
See on the agenda for the 19th, the study session, discussion regarding initiative, a placeholder. What's that?
That is the citizen initiative that is currently going through. That was a place where they're out there getting signatures. Petition. So it's more of just an update to the council to kind of let you know the process, what might occur, what occurs if we do receive it, the signatures. That's what that is.
Excellent, okay.
Is that it?
Yeah. And I have it.
Another question?
No.
Okay. On to direction needed items, strategic plan review 2022, Devin Schmidt.
Yes, Mayor and Council, thank you very much. I think as we look through another year of what I would call tweaking and fine tuning our strategic plan, you will see that it is a little different. It is intentional that way as we look at continuously evolving our strategic plan. Our first one was an amazing work. I think it was really good, but it did tend to get operationally focused. So what we have done really is now begin to push out to the strategic plan becoming more of a larger view, more of a, what I would call policy view. And then we do have an operations plan. That's more internal for staff. We included it on there just so it wasn't a quick like, oh my gosh, where did everything go? So just wanted to let you know and kind of have a brief explanation of where those two documents are, and then I will pass it on to Devin to go through her presentation.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jose, and good afternoon, Devin Schmidt, Budget and Strategic Plan Officer. So I am very excited and pleased to present you guys the refresh of the strategic plan, if you will. And I just wanted to say thank you to everybody in here and all of their staff for the immense effort and work that they put into this plan. I think it really shows, and we're excited about it. So with that, I did want to just take you guys through kind of where we've been. Keyboard? So where did we start? So we've come a really long way, as Jose said. We started back in 21 with the process with a public process followed by staff and council input. This year we did the retreat on the 23rd and 24th with council. And then it came back to staff to make those revisions to the strategic plan. And so as Jose mentioned, we do have the two plans. One is the policy, more policy driven, which outlines those short-term and mid-term goals and objectives and influences the city's budgeting process, guides and implements the full range of services. And then the second one is really the strategic operating plan for staff, which has more action items in it. The option there is for it to be a little bit more tactical and objective. And so it is complementary, but we'll still have the ability to complete the overarching mission and carry out the city council strategic plan. So I did want to talk just a little bit about some of the changes that you'll see in the plan. So from the retreat, we heard that we needed to have a focus around engaged and collaborative governance. So previously under environmental, social sustainability was what that bucket was called, and now it's environmental sustainability and resilience. So we've carved that out and put it into engaged collaborative governance. The other component here that's a little bit different is financial excellence was financial excellence and transparency. That's been retitled to financial excellence and high performing government so that we're able to bring in some of those other areas into the plan. They were there before, but we really wanted to have that emphasis on high performing government. And then finally, when you're looking at the plan, so that top section up there, that's the high level council goals that are discussed at the strategic plan retreat. Any text colors will outline new changes to the plan that weren't previously in there for 2021. And then I did want to take a moment to kind of discuss the performance metrics. So to develop the performance metrics, as staff, we looked at communities across the country that are really nationally recognized champions in the performance excellence arena. And we modeled the performance metrics after those so that we're able to benchmark how we're doing. So that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have the exact same targets or that we're going to perform better or worse than some of those entities, but it really gives us the opportunity to go back and benchmark against it. So it's really, this is kind of the starting point. It's defining the metric, what we're going to look at. And that really came from a process where we talked with SALTAP and we heard from the community members that kind of have a high interest in a lot of these plans. And what we heard was that some of the areas where we use too many acronyms or where we didn't fully describe it, it was challenging for folks to be able to come back and follow what we were trying to measure. So the next step is for us to really build out these performance metrics, looking at levels. So where are we currently? Are the results improving, staying the same? And then comparisons, how do we compare to some of those entities that are really performance excellence champions at a national level? And so moving forward, instead of the quarterly reports where we were going through, we'd say on track or needs focus, we're really just going to dive in and present to council these performance metrics, which will have our target, what the benchmarking city is looking at, and then that should be a way for us to all see, you know, are we using these results for decision making? Are we doing better? Where do we need to allocate resources and things of that nature? So that's to come. But the first step for us was really looking at the other entities that are just champions in this arena and then finding them, and then we'll come in and bring that forward.
So if council has comments or thoughts or suggestions, at what point do you want to do it in each category, or do you want to wait till the end, or how?
You can talk now. This is just kind of high level, and then we can dive into the plan. But yeah, if there's questions around a particular area, let's address them.
So I love what you talked about trends. And I'm thinking not trends just in the last 2 years, but, you know, so that we really know how we're doing. And then I love that you brought out the benchmarking of who we're benchmarking to, because I was wondering about that. But these two that are actually up here also made me think that cumulative budgeted expenses and cumulative revenue, that's great. But within the entire organization, there are so many departments that one who's an outstanding department could get hidden and become part of an average. Or one who's not doing well at all could also be hidden and just become part of an average number. So I'm wondering if we don't also want to look at them maybe by department also, not just community.
Absolutely. And these were in some regard a bit broad and focused. And I think another good example of that, Mayor, is if we're looking at under enhanced livability and sense of place, some of the parks programs. If we lump all of those together and we say Chapman Hill's doing this and Rec Center's doing this, and it doesn't give us a good indication. So I'm thinking, you know, if we did something like a stacked bar chart or something of that nature that really shows programs, it shows departments, we can drill down into the level. But if you wanted to view it at a high level, you can. And so that was kind of our thought process, was to be able to have it at this level, but then also be able to kind of dive into the details like you can in OpenGov. If you want to see summary, you can, but if you want to come further,
right,
that too.
I think that's a great idea, because we also have different kinds of departments and they function very, very differently. And so, so I also didn't know, how are you going to measure the accuracy and precision of the budgets and the expenditures? Like, how do you measure the precision of that?
So I think what we would end up looking at tracking, it could point us back to how often are we having to do budget amendments? Not that those are a bad thing, but how often are we having to do that? I think on the revenue side, that's a really good indicator. How well did we forecast? And how much revenue do we have to cover some of those expenditures? So I think those are all great.
You'll be developing all of that.
Yep. So we're in the process of developing. The first step was to really see what is it that these other entities are doing. They're just phenomenal award winners in this area.
Okay,
So
that's
then,
great.
to follow up on Kim's point, we've actually set a goal of to fall within 5% of our budgeted revenue.
Sure, and I
So
think
it doesn't do us any good if you're under budget and you're bringing in all kinds of money that's not being properly, you know.
right, and I think that's the point about shifting more into this performance metrics, is it's really an easy way, because we can stand up here and say we completed this, or you know, that needs focus or that, but this is really going to be very illuminating to where we're having successes or maybe where we're having challenges. And if we're having challenges, it's not necessarily, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but what are those obstacles that as staff we're facing, and what do we need to kind of focus on to bring that up?
Yeah, and I think the trends will show you too that you're making improvements, because from one year to another, sometimes you can't affect it very much. It has to take 2 to 3 years for the cycle to happen.
Absolutely, and that was a good point too. A lot of the metrics we did look at, the recommendation is to have 3 years worth of data there. And of course, you know, with COVID and all of that, some of the metrics were all over the place, but.
So you'll have to highlight a section that says these do not apply anymore.
Right, exactly. So I did want to make that distinction as well. And then as we move on into this area that's considered really more of the operating action. So the plan here would be to update council on the operating actions in a year in review, but also tie that back to the budget. So in the budget, we would have areas that shows all of the actions that were completed before we enter that budget cycle, or items that will be completed. It's any of those ones that are 1.21. That's really where it becomes very operational. And so we would highlight some of those in the budget area and do a year review as we did last year. So they're very complementary to each other, but definitely wanted to be able to carve out so it's not, here's everything we're doing and have it be completely overwhelming. The other note that I wanted to mention is this is at the very end of our operating plan. So this is the strategic operating plan by service. This is where we'll be budgeting the strategic by strategic plan in the actual budget process. So we're really trying to take it to where you're looking at it based on a service and not at a department level. And so this is where you'll be able to come back and say how much budgetary dollars should we spend towards enhanced livability and sense of place and things of that nature. So just wanted to let you know that that's forthcoming. And then at this point, I just wanted to open up for council discussion related to the 2 plans that you all received and any feedback or direction.
On the financial.
On these guys.
Strategic plan that you just did.
Yeah.
So I have a whole bunch of things, but I think what I'll do is I'll just do a follow-up email because now that I have heard what you have to say, which is that you're in a development phase, I don't know how to look at, when we get these things, I don't know how to look at this. Like, is this a next to final plan or is it development? And so that's something else I would really appreciate in the cover when you do that. Is that letting us know where we are in your thoughts about this, because now I know I don't have to worry about making sure we discuss this today. I can just give you my thoughts and you can incorporate them if you think it's necessary, or we can talk about it at another meeting. So that helps me a lot.
So are you not going to go through each of the sections?
I certainly can.
No,
I
I
have
was
it.
just curious. I thought you were, since I started going through financial excellence, but you're not.
Sorry, that was, I probably could, I was just trying to explain how to read the plan.
Oh, I see.
But I can pull it up. I have it.
No, I mean,
in the drives here.
if that wasn't part of the thought process, and
I have a question as well that might drive this. Jose, what is your desired schedule for having council adopt this plan?
The desired schedule would be, the next council meeting on the 19th. So this is to talk about it and receive any type of feedback following what we did last year where we presented it. Of course, I think maybe last year we did go through it goal by goal, and we can definitely do that now. We have plenty of time within our presentation.
Yeah,
to
then
do
I think
so.
we should.
And then just get anything that
okay.
we may have missed is really kind of what we're looking for. Anything that you see that maybe you're like, I'm not sure we said that, or I'm not sure we have agreements on. So that we're just kind of cleaning that up so that on the 19th, we place it on the agenda, we're ready to go.
Okay, then let's go through it.
Okay.
Can we go back to financial excellence then?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I did want to note that we have the several, we have the one new bucket, so we'll cover that one last, and financial excellence is our starting point.
You might want to, real quick, if you don't mind, just going
Sure,
to the top. No, sorry, the top of that next page.
Over here, yep.
Just want to make sure that we did include from the retreat well-being. That was something that we had talked about to discuss to place in there to motivate energy, resources, and well-being on the strategic plan purpose. I just wanted to highlight that because that is an incorporation of some of the discussion that we heard at the retreat.
Okay,
So do you actually motivate energy? Do you actually motivate well-being? Or are you trying to encourage it or enhance it? Just a question. I'm not sure you can motivate energy.
So I have a question about this, and I'm looking at your operational, features. Thank you for putting this, so I could.
Right.
At the retreat, because I know I raised the question, I think that there was full support. My real concern is that we come out with a plan of how we're gonna finance some of these big issues. So I'm looking for that kind of language in your.
I was looking, Did you look at 1.3 on the detail?
Yeah, that's where I'm coming back to, looking at where we're.
So it's under 1.3,
Yeah.
1.2, and it's determine long-term revenue solutions for core services, housing innovation, stormwater
Good.
management, considering ballot initiatives for debt service or cash flow.
Okay, thank you. I was
And I
just
was gonna say, I'm really happy to see this. On your detail of your plan, because we've been talking about this for a while, so it's really nice to have it. Should look at this next year.
Yeah.
My other comment, sorry if I.
No, that's right,
interrupted,
that's right.
Was that I'm just so excited to see the 10-year financial forecast. And I think that that's going to drive the need to deal with the identifying innovative revenue streams to address these core services. So I just, my only comment on that is I'm really, really happy to see those on there.
I agree with that.
Anything else under financial excellence and high performing government?
Well, just to the point that Barbara and both Melissa just made, if you notice how we're looking at these, we're looking at them side by
Totally.
side.
Sure.
And when I first looked at the information in the, and I wasn't gonna print out 52 pages, it was really challenging for me. Yeah, well, even in black and white, but the black and white disappeared, so it was really challenging for me to have to go back and forth, and I'm wondering if presentation wise, if they don't actually belong together.
If you're going to be including those as part of the public document.
We can look at that. Just trying to look at kind of where we would place it just like two separate documents where you have the strategic plan, the operating plan. Because this would be a little bit more staff driven, but if there is somebody who would want to dig into it, I mean, I definitely think we could do a bigger one. It's just, placing on the website, we could do one that's combined, and if they wanted to take one that hasn't combined or something, we can take.
I was gonna say, I understand like the point of us looking at them both, but like the public, like, to get, so like, the majority of the public isn't gonna wanna look at this, so.
They're not gonna look at any of it.
Well, like, but if they do look at something, it'll just be that high level, like, so I agree keeping them separate, and I can.
I'm putting it together for mine.
Yeah,
But I can see where with this staff plan, so it is.
So performance excellence and high performing government, any other comments or suggestions on that one? Good. Yeah. Okay, good. So we're on to affordability and economic opportunity.
I have one point. When I read it, under item 2.2, leverage established URA areas, and I was concerned that that could be interpreted as only the two that have been approved. So I didn't want you to have language that could then be limiting.
At the end of that, it does say, and develop additional URA plans to achieve community goals. So is
Right.
that,
Yeah, it was kind of, I just wanted to make certain that you weren't limiting yourself.
You good? Or?
Yeah, I think that last sentence, so it's use the existing ones, but also non-new as needed.
And then they would become existing.
Yeah. That's great. I just wanted to make certain we weren't going to be limiting, if somebody wasn't coming to say, you're going beyond what you said.
I don't really comment on this, well, a couple comments, but my only, one of the things that struck me on this, was just reading it on the staff plan, was that 1.1 in encouraging housing opportunities for all economic demographics. And of course, we want to be inclusive and equal, but I have been under the assumption that we've really been working towards workforce and attainable housing as well as affordable housing. So I'm just wondering how staff intends to incorporate all. I mean, that's a bigger nugget if you're, and that opens, well, that's everybody.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sure what we're doing for everybody, I just don't know.
Yeah, and I don't support the city putting a lot of energy into above 120 EMIs.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
So, yeah.
So I just was getting curious about that. It struck me as I mean, it's inclusive and we want to incorporate everybody when we can, but it's specifically regarding housing. I think we've been targeting a different population than all.
Well, and I sent an email and I probably should have copied you, but all of you, but I also asked, where's the emphasis that I thought we agreed to on workforce and middle income? And because it was talking affordability and then it also had all, but it wasn't really showing what we agreed at the summer to focus on.
Yep, and if you say the all, I mean, explain, you can correct me, you can tell me the staff's perspective, but if you say the all, then I think it means that we need to designate some staff time to above 120. And I just don't,
that's what we were planning on doing this.
So-
Either you wanna
If we can refine that language and hone in a little bit better.
Okay, so you agree then?
And we're trying to keep it, housing opportunities for all the income profile, but I get what you're saying.
But I would also argue that we have a housing shortage across the board. And so making sure staff is, working with people that are building housing of all types, but we're not gonna probably allocate much money in terms of but I love our staff's outward approach to helping developers and working with them more collaboratively now versus, versus before, but I agree with the monetary, city helping.
I'd say the specific.
That was
one name wrong,
Yeah.
something like that, and then we did suggest some updated language on the first metric to track inventory of affordable and workforce units. To highlight that middle income range, we'll see that updated.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good approach, just highlighting that.
Well, so I still don't think that this emphasizes enough that this council last summer chose to focus on workforce and middle income housing. I don't think that that is up front here. I agree we should put effort into affordable housing also, absolutely, but we agreed to a focus, and I don't think that that's showing up in this strategic plan very well. So I would appreciate some change there. The other one was on the one, which is the multi-generational community workforce. I love that, but I also like mixed income. So maybe it's a multi-generational mix, because that's one of the other things we're trying to do is not have certain areas of our community be all 30% AMI or 70% AMI or 100% AMI. It's about having people be mixed together and working together as a community and living together as a community, I guess. So that I would love to see that too. And you go.
No, I think you're making a good point. I was just asking what's that.
So another thing I was wondering about was back in the enhanced livability and sense of space, there's underneath the Parks and Rec, there's a comment about looking at the 2005 dedicated sales tax as far as re-upping it for Parks and Rec. But we also have talked about whether or not we want to look at 2005, the capital side of it, the Florida Road and the library side that's going to be getting paid off as becoming dedicated to housing. And there's nothing in the housing comment here. There's nothing in here about finding revenue sources specifically for housing. It says commit resources and revenue, but it doesn't say actively engage in determining what revenues, how we allocate revenues, or whatever, however you want to say it. And to Barbara's point, the ARPA funds are one time, and we need, in order to be successful, we need an ongoing funding mechanism for housing, at least for the next maybe 10 years. I don't know what it is for sure, but and it doesn't mean that we don't go back then to funding Parks and Rec development, but right now we're out of balance. We have a $140 million spent on Parks and Rec over the last 20 years, and we have a few $1 million spent on housing over the last 7 years. And we're seeing the effect of that in our community right now. So,
did we determine that that's what we were going to do with the 2005?
No,
sales?
no,
Okay.
that's why
I was like, wait, did I miss something?
no, but it's
Okay.
specifically
Yeah.
mentioned in the Parks and Rec part, and we have discussed it in this, but there is nothing in here about finding revenue. There's nothing in here about identifying revenue streams for funded housing. And yet that's what we're going to have to do to be successful.
And I actually think, to your point, so I've had that conversation with board members from the Parks and Rec that, yeah, you have this very specific interest, but as counselors, we have to look at everything.
So it's interesting because it's in different places, because it is in financial excellence. Exactly that. You're talking about long-term solutions for housing innovation. So if that's what's going to be a little bit hard if we nitpick your operational plan and tell you where to put things. I'm not sure. I don't know.
I'm not looking at the operational plan. I'm looking at the higher one, the affordability and economic opportunity. So that because when
it was in there.
Right, you want it to be, the policy conversation wants to be in here, and the policy is that we need to find funding. We don't know what it is yet, but we need to find funding for housing. So it's the one that
So maybe though,
that's not.
No, but in this the detail of the financial, you know, it needs to be brought forward potentially is what I'm hearing here.
I think it needs to be in the housing section for sure, because housing.
Affordability, yeah.
Yeah, housing is something that we're doing something different than we've ever done before around housing over the last year and going forward. And I think, and we did agree, and I mean, we had a 2-day meeting in the summer to look at this. And so I think that should really inform
It
the
could
policy.
also, and we also discussed infrastructure needs and how are they gonna be funded.
Right.
But
Again,
that's.
I would argue.
But again, to the point that to actually see in a workplace plan, we're gonna focus on 2005 being renewed. That's, you know, that's our conversation with Jose, which is like, look, we wanna discuss 2005 and what's the best use for it. If you're out here working on this, you're out in front of us. And so, again, we talked about housing, we also talked about how we're gonna pay for stormwater management and what are these things. So I think in all of those areas, I would like to keep that the 2005, we will reconsider it.
So take it out of the Parks and Rec
Mhm.
and put it into finance.
Finance, that's what I think.
For the
Exactly.
conversation.
Nowhere else, like not
Yes,
housing,
yes,
not,
yeah.
but
It's fine.
like, how are we going to do it? Because we talked about long-term transit funding, we've talked about lots of things about 2009.
Yeah.
So
So-
I would support that.
Yeah.
too.
Can I ask one point of clarification? Would you all want it at this policy level? I mean, is it more than less, not in the actions, but where it's here?
Well, you might say something in the sense of reevaluate dedicated sales taxes. And then the 2005 happens to be the one, because in the future, that sentence could go forward for 10 years because we have other dedicated sales taxes coming up for renewal.
And so,
Including the lodger's tax, which right now we're already talking about, so.
so you'll leave it in the financial.
Yes,
No,
so we'll bring it to the
Bring it
top.
forward to
Yeah.
that, which is, I think that's your place.
So I had a lot on, obviously, affordability and economic opportunity, and I was gonna just do it as an email, but I'll follow up with it. But the performance metrics. So under inventory of affordable housing units, and I realized that people are using the HOA, the Housing Opportunity Index, which tells you what percentage of homes that are for sale in the community are affordable by the median income. But my answer to that kind of is like, so what? Because what really matters is how many people with median incomes cannot afford homes because there are not homes available. So if 20% of our market is available to median income earners, but 40% of our community are median income earners, that means 50% of our median income earners cannot afford to buy a home in this community. And I think that when we look at metrics, we need to talk about, where do we want that to be? Is it okay that only 50% can afford that? Or are we happy with 10%? Or do we want 70%? And so for me, the median income can also change, right? So if we become like an Aspen or a Vail where our median incomes of people are over 150% or over 200%, then we may have 3 houses. I mean, it changes all the statistics. So I think we can go with the HOI, but I think we also need to talk about what's our gap in how many people in certain income brackets can actually afford a home here or not. Because I think that's what we're really striving for, right? Is to be able to have the majority of people be able to afford a home or a rental unit.
And I'll build on that. For me, when I was looking at it, I see these maybe a little heavy on the output side as opposed to the outcome side, which is what I was looking for. I was thinking of things like, you know, how many of our, let's say, police officers now live in town because they can afford, they've been able to find housing. So if we think about our workforce, how has that changed? How many of our teachers can now live within the county or, you know, some defined area because they're not commuting. So I'm looking, that to me is an outcome that I'm looking for. And I was explaining to somebody else the other day, our population, it's not like we're bringing in all kinds of new people. We're actually having the people who are commuting to Durango for work, all of a sudden being able to live here. So yes, our population will go up, but hopefully the commuting number goes down, and that's something that I would want to track.
Much better impact on our community.
Yeah.
We can see if there's data. That data exists currently, but we can see if
And there's a way to track it.
Sure.
Some key sectors where we know folks aren't able, they're commuting from outside, even of the state.
Well, we have that information in the Region 9 evaluation, all that information of how many commuters in and out of all sorts of areas. It's all there somewhere. And it might be in a really nice report. The other metric that I kind of wanted to mention was the number of first-time business owners. I think that's great, but how many businesses are we losing? So if we're not losing businesses and we're gaining businesses, that's awesome. But if we're losing businesses as fast as we're gaining them, there's something, possibly wrong there.
I see here under 1.2, the emphasis on middle income housing. So just pointing that out in the plan that is there, and I hadn't noticed that before, so I just wanted to point that out. And I am happy again to see the 1.1 ensuring adequate staff to focus on all of the increase in affordable and workforce housing inventory, because I think that this has been a huge priority for the city, and I think the staff, city's been, I think we're making big strides, and I appreciate what we've done. So I like what I'm seeing here. I like how we are also working well, like Jessica was saying, with people who are trying to address this market. Yeah. Working all time to be creative and innovative, and hoping to see more of that. That's, I think, really been effective. And appreciate it. That's what developers.
Anything else in that category? All right, on to enhanced livability and sense of place. So I had under safety, police and emergency services 1.1, become one of the safest cities in Colorado. So I'm challenged by that because what does that mean? If Colorado suddenly becomes an incredibly unsafe state and we actually have more crime, but we're the safest city in Colorado, what's that say? So I don't think that that's a very good description of what we really want. I don't know exactly how to change it, but it's kind of like, what's our measurement for safety? What are we comfortable with? And I realized that down in the Part 1 crimes, we're measuring that, and we get that all the time anyway. Thank you very much, Lamar, I appreciate that. But what is it that we want to see here? What does the community consider safe? Obviously, zero crimes is like nigh on impossible without a dictator state or something like that. And where do we rank? I don't know if that's as important as what's the effect on our own community.
I mean, wondering the same thing. Is that a designation? Is there a designation around that? Like bikeable Colorado cities, bikeable towns? I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me to come up. So we looked at multiple strategic plans from across the country. A lot of what they were looking at was national challenges. But after a conversation with other organizations, it's problematic in itself too, because laws are different across different states. So what we did is we tried to narrow that down to Colorado in itself per se. Obviously, Part 1 crimes are the main measure we look at. There's also quality of life ones we look at as well. So if I can remind council of our mission, it's to reduce crime and perception of crime. So a lot of that is perceived, and that's what the relative safety of the community is based upon, is that perception of crime, how safe do we feel. And that's where we need to continue to measure as part of our strategy, is that engagement portion of it. So we'll have these conversations with our community members to hear their concerns, so we can focus our efforts based off of those concepts that they have. We need to be focusing, directing our staff to do. There are quantitative measures, obviously, crimes, how many tickets can we write, how many arrests can we make. None of those really affect crime per se in itself. There's a lot broader of a community base strategy that we have to work on, and there's things we're going through right now, you know, for resources for treatment per se, to deal with some drug addiction aspects of it, because when they have drug addiction, people are feeding habits, so they create more crime in order to fuel that, because they don't have the economic support to have it. So there's a lot of those components that go along with it, but a lot of that per se measures the qualitative aspect of it.
Well, so just recently, in the last month or so, and then like within the last year, I forwarded national rankings of Durango as not being very safe and not being perceived as very safe. So defining safest is going to be very, very difficult because, as you've mentioned, they aren't necessarily looking at the metrics we want to look at. So maybe we need to develop like what makes us safe. And so we know how our community feels about it and what they're experiencing. And so that the community feels that we're safe, not that we're one of the safest cities in Colorado, but our community feels safe here. You know, our members feel safe in our community. Maybe that's what we're really looking for.
It's a great suggestion, Mayor. I think we can certainly do that because we are challenged by looking at different communities. A lot of the agencies, well, communities up around the Fort Collins area, per se, they're veteran communities. And so they don't have infrastructure like we do with bars and
sure,
dispensaries and, you know, places where people want to come to. They're veteran communities that serve other communities. So people are there, they sleep, crime rates are extremely low in those areas.
Yeah.
There. And there might be some domestic violence and some other aspects to that, but they're not going to have the types of crimes.
Right.
So yes, we're definitely concerned.
Yeah, I would love that to be about, so it's about us, about our experience, not about Collins, Fort Collins' experience.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have one other on down under the performance metrics under the paved trails, cumulative number of visits. So one of the things that's come up recently in the last couple of months is that we've had a couple of major sections on the river trail that have become very deteriorated. One of them right now is on the bridge that goes underneath the 16550 bridge below Santa Rita Park, where the bridge connects to the land. The land is actually falling away underneath it. There's a big gap. There's differences in grade, and it's getting pretty dangerous. So I'm also concerned that one of the things this talks about also adding new trails, but it doesn't talk about keeping our trails maintained at a certain level, whether it be a safe level or what have you. And because I think that's also critically important. It's that concept that we were talking about maintaining what we have, not just building more or buying more. Any other comments on enhanced livability and sense of place?
I think you can also take it to the parks and everything, the maintenance. You stated specific, but I was just write maintenance. I think it's an issue of maintaining what we have to standards.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So, I'm sorry, I was just looking for something that came to my mind when Chief Brammer came, I'm sorry, when Chief Brammer came forward and I was looking for it. I really like what we have been doing with access and the mental health program. And is that on here? Continued involvement of that.
There's a collaborate with partner agencies one.
I don't know if you want to put it on there, but I sure have thought that program has been really, really helpful and productive for our community and trying to address some of the mental health aspects of it. Just a thought of kind of looking for it and cruising it, but I didn't think I had seen.
And then also, and I'll look to Jessica on this, on the arts and culture funding.
Yeah.
I saw that as, again, an output. And from an outcome, I was looking at, so where does that money, what does that money do for us? Does it generate, more visits? Does it, from people, does it generate more?
Is our artist community expanding?
Is it expanding? And so I don't really want to see the grant list. That's kind of operational. I want to see, so what's happened with it? What are they driven?
You're not trying to measure it. You just want to see that outcome.
Well, measuring.
I want to
it to a
measure
point.
it in terms of we're putting this
How much
effort
money?
because it could be, okay, so this effort has helped us secured X million in grants to do these things, or these nonprofits have been able to expand and they're creating jobs, good paying jobs at this level, or something to this effect, or even, another good outcome.
Well, we have more artists. I like.
We have more
50%.
artists, there's more art. We're now viewed as a go-to place for the art scene, something.
Instead of just like art pieces and it's more of the creative
Right.
economy, like how
Right,
is
yeah.
it?
So
you
I didn't see
stress
that.
the ending.
I didn't see that coming out of it.
We can revisit that.
Under enhanced during a sense of place and makes itself a
Yeah.
community's character, yeah.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. Any comments, thoughts, suggestions?
Did these goals, did the consultant help drive these goals?
What we did here is, we made some changes that necessarily the intent, but in partnership with CPSHR, we leveraged our roadmap that we're working with them to update and reflect the language around how and what our goals are. So yes, we have strong partnership with this.
So it's hard to read the yellow, just so you
I
know,
was
but
gonna say,
I guess where I was looking for it, and maybe I just didn't see it, so please point it out if I missed it. I was looking at efforts around increased translation services, or having that be, like so standard that it's almost, inculcated into the fabric of who we are, as that we think about that.
So we do still have that as part of, under improved communications, require all departments to include DEI goals in their 2022 budget, including departmental translation resources. One thing I don't know if I covered well in the beginning was DEI, instead of having one or a few departments underneath it, we've made it to where it's an entire city focus. So when we're budgeting for those things, it'll be really apparent what those DEI focuses are. And so that we could expand upon that if we need to further, but we're certainly keeping that departmental translation in there.
I saw it somewhere in here that said about making sure that people, here it is, language incentive pay. Durango is a diverse community whose residents speak with many languages. In order to provide a high quality of service to those residents whose primary language is not English, the city strives to provide its workforce to accommodate the written and verbal needs of persons speaking languages other than English. Now, I don't know why that's called language incentive pay, because that's kind of a weird heading for that concept, but I think that's kind of where that's showing up. It's like all of staff and everybody's focused on how do we communicate with everyone, even if they don't speak English, or particularly if they don't speak English. Is that kind of, you see that one, Barbara?
Yeah, what number is that on?
It's not a number, it's on the,
It's a performance.
the performance, it's on the,
Oh, there it is, okay. I mean, I look at it and I say that, and I don't expect that you can do it all. You can't do it all at once, certainly, but I can see we've got, translation at city council meetings. We have them occasionally at multimodal meetings and occasionally in community development or parks and rec meetings. I know as just coming off the IAB, there could be a community that has issues there and there's no way for them to understand what we're talking about in that regard. So just trying to figure out how we make certain that that we're reaching out to folks where English is not their original language.
and I don't you think that?
I think it does,
approaches
yes,
that?
yeah.
But I do think the title of that's kind of weird.
Yeah,
That's what our program's called internally, so we can certainly revisit that, so it's a little
You can
clearer.
just leave the pay off of it.
Sure.
Any other questions on DEI? Effective infrastructure network. So I had a couple of questions on the sanitation, water, wastewater, stormwater, the 2.1. Continue to offer potable water on demand and in compliance with all regulatory guidance. You know, I think that that's an absolute must. But maybe even more importantly, and this goes to something that you all mentioned earlier, I think the efficiency of our systems, like making sure that they're under good repair so that they're not leaking, we're not losing water out of our own systems. We're not, you know, that kind of thing too, because we can provide potable water to the community and yet be using, even though our members aren't using it, be losing and using 3 times as much water as we actually need. And we'd still be providing potable water. So what is it that we're really trying to do here in an efficient way or an effective way or something? I don't know, so that you're making sure that you're catching that concept, that you don't let things just fall apart.
Again, the word is maintenance, but I didn't see.
Well, it's more than maintenance because to me, it's how is it operating? Yeah. And then the airport, the aviation, the thing that for me is missing in all of this about the airport is how do we get people to and from the airport without everybody having to drive their own car? How do we get people to and from Aztec and Farmington to the airport? If we're truly the regional hub, we need to have people able to get to and from the airport, because the last thing we want to do probably is have more and more and more parking to accommodate more and more people as we grow. What we really want is more and more people and more airlines or whatever, right? So I would really love to see us at least start thinking about how do we get transportation involved with the airport. And I know we're doing it through the EV bus grant that we got, that'll have an airport service, but it's not going to be, it's a beginning.
I'm going to Farmington.
No, or Aztec, and it's only a beginning. It's yeah, so. And then the other one under asset management of infrastructure. I love the idea that we're working on the CIPs for all the infrastructure departments and the management system. But I also would like to know that when we do capital improvement projects, part of the reason for doing them, or maybe part of the effect of doing them, is that they reduce the operating costs in the future. Because that's what you're trying to do. One of the things you're trying to do is improve the efficiency of whatever you're doing so that you don't have to spend as much money to do it and still provide the same quality service.
On asset management, Devin, I'm delighted to see it in their infrastructure, because I think that's, you know, essential, but was it also mentioned under Parks and Rec, under transportation? Because what we, you know, I firmly believe we need that asset management plan, and each department is going to have its own unique needs there. So while I see it here, is it incorporated into the other areas?
So what I would say, and Allison, correct me if I'm wrong, but it has to do with it being within that whole CIP division. So it has the holistic approach. So because we said collate the 5-year CIP, it would be that part, it would be managed by CIP. It would include the multimodal, the Parks and Rec, and any water, sewer, airport, all of it would be under that part. Well, airport, they manage it separately, but it would still be included in that.
The comprehensive one, fully comprehensive, would have like City Hall, it would have all of the different buildings that we know that we're gonna have a timeline for when we replace big ticket items.
Yes, and that should be, part of the process as well, as part of that plan. So it's kind of a holistic approach that we're taking with it.
But it's not mentioned under finance, right?
No, it's within the year.
Yeah, and I wondered if maybe it should be cross-referenced to drive home that it's not just infrastructure that you're thinking about.
All departments and facilities.
Parks, everything, the asset in the city, claims.
Couple thoughts I have on this one is 1.6 under maintain streets accessibility. I really liked that we're focusing on, you know, replacing faded and damaged signs and addressing graffiti and maintaining, also the second one here, maintaining high levels of service for our snow removal and services that we provide, and I guess I think that is so important as to what we do as a city, and I'm wondering how we assess our performance on that.
And I would add alleys.
And alleys? But yeah, I didn't really see it under the performance metrics, so I was just curious how we do it, because I think it's so important.
I think when you're talking about, maintenance activities like snow removal, sweeping,
Trash.
things, right, things like that, we can certainly come up with some more specific metrics to track that with.
You know, I think our survey kind of asks questions around it, like, are you happy with your city service? So I'm just curious how we are, because I think we do a good job. But I just was wondering how you guys were planning to look at that.
And we have not talked about this specific, we talked more about the quantities that we'll accomplish and the linear footage, and the number of tons of material removed. But I understand what you're saying, that those are nice, but they don't really capture the, are we really accomplishing what we're setting out to do? So, I can work on coming up with a better.
I'm not sure what the answer would be.
And I don't have it off the top of my head, but if we can think about it a little bit.
One of the interesting things that I don't know if it's interesting or not, but you might consider is the trend aspect of it too, because just at point in time, we're picking up this much trash doesn't really mean anything. But if we can see that our population isn't growing and we're picking up a lot more trash, well, that's saying something. I'm not certain what it is. Does it mean we're keeping it cleaner, or does it mean that people are throwing away more trash? I don't know, but that gives us something else to investigate, right? But having that trend, I think, is really important to see where we're going with it. Might be helpful to that conversation.
So that was just one thought I had on that. And then the other, I was, of course, very happy to see our parking study under 1.2.1 to understand the parking supply and demand and identify transportation demand. And I'm wondering also on that, there's been a lot of talk around that, of course, with our downtown visioning plan and the need to do both simultaneously. So what I would just hope that we are able to do after we do that is a really good communication plan to council and the community on the outcome of that parking study, so people know we've done it, where we, and the outcomes of that, because I think so many people, I'm hearing that a lot.
And to follow up on what Melissa said is, and then once we have that study, where do the resources come from to address the recommendations?
Right.
I mean, I don't know if the recommendation, say it is some parking structure or something else, where do we allocate? What's the plan for allocating resources to address the recommendations?
So on the performance metrics, cumulative lane miles of roadway pavement improved. It's an interesting number, but it doesn't really mean anything. I think what might be more important is, so we have 100% of our roadways. What percentage of them have been improved over the last 5 years, have been improved this year? So where do we have to go? Because that's more important. So what if we repair 5 miles of lanes that we have 3,000 miles of road? What does that mean, right? So I think something that actually tells us how are we doing in our overall picture of the amount of roadways that we have and how well maintained are they.
Or even a projection will increase the street index that are well maintained will go from X% to 5X%.
Something that shows how well we're taking care of it, not just that we paved some amount of road. Transit ridership. I talked with Jose briefly about this, and I can't remember if I talked to Sarah about it, but I want to, is one of the things that we keep saying is about 73% of our riders on our transit require the transit system because they're transit dependent. Well, wouldn't it be exciting if that number was only 40%? Because it's the same number of people who are transit dependent riding it, the same absolute number. but because the transit is so good that the other 60% of our community, the other 60% of the riders are people who are not transit dependent, that they're walking out their door and getting on the transit because they want to. And they've got a car in the garage. They could easily get in the car, but they're not. So maybe now that I know that we've been using that number to get grants and things like that, and that's really valuable, but maybe what we need to start focusing on is let's make our transit system so good that we all want to ride it, that we don't ever want to get in our car. And have that be our goal. And I don't know how we measure that or how we add that into it. But for me, that would be, can you imagine what that would be like? It would be that carless downtown for sure, if we could do that. Under capital projects completion, one of the comments, and I love this because this is something I know Barbara and I particularly harped on, measuring on-time completion and within budget at 100%, excluding scope revisions, change conditions, and quality miscalculations. I think there's a slight problem with excluding scope revisions because how accurate was the original scope? Did we totally miscalculate what we were going to have to do? Or under calculate what we thought we were going to have to do so that we could then add it later as a scope revision. And I know that that's not what our staff does. I know that's not what we focus on, but that has been part of the community critique of how the city operations has worked in the past, that they didn't scope it properly. And then that allowed for some weird manipulations. And I'm not suggesting by any means that the staff does that, but I also want to speak to the perception of our staff operations within the community and the things that they've been worried about in the past. So under operating costs per employee passenger, it would be great also to know what the satisfaction level is with our employee passengers, because if we're reducing our operating costs, maybe the satisfaction level is going down and people don't like going to the airport anymore. You know, but just an idea.
Would you also want to see an increase in, if we are a regional airport, an increase of where the passengers are coming from? So percentage coming from Farmington, percentage Pagosa, Cortez, something to that effect. I think Farmington would be one.
Sure.
So if now we typically get 10 passengers from Farmington a week.
Versus them going to Albuquerque.
Yeah, versus going to Albuquerque. Or number of passengers in Durango, reduced number going to Albuquerque.
So this one I mentioned before, but increased bicycle facilities measured in miles. Basically, it's more important, not just the miles, but what's the condition of those miles? That one was already mentioned before, but it showed up again under these performance. Any other comments on effective infrastructure network? Okay, so on environmental sustainability and resilience. I really liked how we're looking at, I don't know what to call it. Jose, you had a great name for like waste, trash, and recycle. What you call that? You've waste, trash, and recycle. There's a phrase that you were using previously to describe that.
I don't know, but I'll take credit for it.
Anyway, I really like how we're looking at all of this now. You know, it's not just oh God, we have to get rid of the garbage. So how do we do that? It's a bigger holistic picture. And I think that's great how we're doing that, as well as with all the other environmental aspects of it. Okay, any questions or thoughts on the environmental sustainability and resilience? engaged in collaborative governance. So under performance metrics, the community survey, I think under satisfaction, you'll probably be capturing it, but like, what's its impact on our quality of life? Is it improving? I think that's probably one of the more critical parts. Yes, I'm satisfied, but I'm not as satisfied as I was last year. Or yes, I'm satisfied, but I'm more satisfied than I was. The number of meetings and or calls with developers or owners indicating availability to support community through engineering engagement. I think that's fabulous because I know that communication, as you mentioned, Jessica, is so important. But this metric could actually measure something else. It could measure how confusing the process is. And then in order to understand it, they have to make a lot of phone calls. So I wonder if we could tighten that up in some way so that we know that the increase in calls is because we're assisting our community and making a difference in that way versus clearing up a misunderstanding kind of situation. I don't know how we do that, but.
I just really, I support this being a separate one. I think it's so important and it just looks, I really appreciate seeing it separated out because it was kind of confusing the way it was before. And just seeing how important so many of these things are, improving our online presence, expanding community outreach, establishing a brand, creating, a brand that includes community outreach. I just think all that stuff is so important. Really happy to see us focusing on it and separating it out.
And I was curious, not wanting to get into the operational side, but looking at it, is there an intent to start having more like town halls and things along opportunities for that level of engagement? I remember when we were doing the interview process, folks talked about how, coffee with the city manager or a meeting at the community at the community concert hall, ask us questions, sense of here's a real ability to come and hear what's going on. And I think that's very different from the social engagement, which seems to be, well covered. But I would look for when we can get back to that and significant that in-person community engagement. That's not a structured meeting.
Yeah, we have been looking forward to some of those opportunities. We've actually had a couple that aren't really citywide specific, but I think when you took it, your downtown visioning next steps, those were in person. There's one in here for the airport that they went through and had some community involvement going through. So I think we are going to see those ramp up into which we can utilize one for kind of a city in general. I know PD, the chief back there is about to start their process as well. So going into some public engagement opportunities to see kind of where the ideas are for our enhanced safety of our community.
Any more questions or thoughts or anything staff wants to say overall about the strategic plan at this point?
What an incredible amount of work was done.
Yes.
Incredible amount of work and what a long way we've come.
So thank you.
So I also wanted to say that for me, personally, being on the city council for 3 years, I see a tremendous shift in the mood around how we're looking at how the city operates, how we're managing for the community, and it's all positive. I am really, really impressed. The feedback I'm getting from community members is great. I'm not getting these phone calls that are just, like, wow, okay, back off kind of phone calls. They're positive phone calls. We had that opportunity. I sent it out to all of council, and I don't know if all of staff saw it or not, but the opportunity to have a really good conversation with someone in the community who usually complains, but he had a meeting with Savannah Lytle, and they had a great conversation about the downtown visioning plan, and I got to forward on his comments, and I did it in his language because those words don't come out of my mouth. But it was great to be able to do that and to feel really good about that. And it's every department I'm hearing that about, just so you know, it's not just one or the other. Sometimes those are easier to communicate than others, but There is a complete shift in how this culture is here from 3 years ago, from 2 years ago. And I credit everyone in the room and everyone in the organization for making that happen. And it's why it made me feel glad that I became a city councilor. So thank you.
Appreciate that comment, and definitely have an amazing team behind us that have really taken off with the strategic plan. And I remember last year going through it, I was like, wow, this is really great. This year it gets even better, and then so next year it's exciting to see what we'll continue to come up with. So the credit goes to the team that we have, and Devin and her team also coordinating and placing this together. It's just been great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Deb.
All right, so on to information only items, the housing program update.
So we have Eva Henson, our Housing Innovation Manager, to come do a presentation. I do want to take a time just here to give the council credit for this. Housing was something that you saw as a very important part of this community and one of our efforts, and you placed funding for us to create a housing division. And I think as we've seen, just even in the short time that she's been here, has really hit the ground running. It has done some truly amazing things for the organization, for the community. So it is my pleasure to have Eva come in and give an update on how we've been doing in our housing initiatives for this year, your first quarter.
First quarter. Yeah, really excited to have that under my belt and be here before you this afternoon and just really engaging, looking for the dialogue, your questions, feedback, input as we continue to lay this foundation and framework for moving forward with the Housing Innovation Division, my role, and the housing program. So with that, we'll kind of kick this off, and I'll be cognizant of time too. So we may breeze through a couple.
We're right on time.
Are we good?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're right on time. So you theoretically have 60 minutes.
So as we indicated today, the Affordability and Economic Opportunity Housing Program and housing initiatives, this is really a first quarter update. The staff report was pretty comprehensive. I'll just pause on that for just a moment. It's a lot of information, but I think it was important information. We had a lot of moving parts with my position and just really getting started with things. And really, as we identified, hitting the ground running on a couple of things. So really with that, I sort of wanted to break down the staff report into sort of 3 buckets of information. We'll hit a couple of those highlighted things for the Housing Innovation Division. For 2022 work plan, the key priorities, we've heard you. And we're going to be working on some of those initiatives here on the forefront. And development opportunities, a critical component to sort of getting successful units in the ground. Couldn't do that without collaboration and partnerships. So we'll identify some of those that could be certainly near term. We may take some things off the list too today. So we'll kind of go through some of that as well. And one of the key takeaways that I really think is important, I sort of live and breathe this on a daily basis, but our current approach is to encourage and incentivize a wide variety of housing types through a diverse mix of programs and policies, including the creation of effective regulations and formation of public-private partnerships. Also, efficiency sort of falls in that realm. It's a many tools in the toolbox perspective. It does not rely on a single program or policy to address this very complex, multifaceted housing crisis that we're facing here in Durango. And so we don't have a silver bullet, but we're making some strides, right? And so some key components here, inventory of affordable units. Best Western, sort of right front and center right now with the hotel motel conversion. Of the 71 existing units, they plan to add an additional 49 units for a total of a 120 unit affordable housing project. The target there will be at or below 60% area median income. I do understand they will possibly have some ADA compliant units within that project because they already have some handicap rooms. So I just wanted to bring that to the attention as well. And then of course, making some strides on that target of the 1,000 housing units long-term affordable by the year 2040. Also supporting land banking and affordable housing for options for all. One of the examples that really comes front and center recently that has come before you for approval was the Anima City Park Overlook project there with collaboration from the housing program, 22 townhomes with 10 of those having a deed restriction. I think we identified 4 will have kind of what we would call a heavier restriction, AMI percentage caps. qualifying, buying income caps, resale caps, those kind of things will be critical component for those 4. And then the other 6 will have what we call the rider restriction, occupants only work or leave requirement there.
Eva, I will say that I think the make 1,000 housing units long-term affordable by the year 2040 is an outdated goal.
I did hear that feedback, I think in January, yes.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So it just, so, because I agree with that, I did, and if I can find where I wrote it down. So of affordable housing units since 71, when the list starts, to today, it's been an average of 14 units per year have been added. But since 2015 to today, it's been an average of 31 units per year added. And then if you look at just the last.
Is that market rate?
No, that's your affordable housing.
The affordable housing rate.
So then if you just look at the last 2 years, and you could add the 2018 into that, you're looking at more like an average of 44 per year. So I think, I don't know what that means, except that it looks like we've been much better lately, although it's scattered all over the board per year, but sometimes there's been big gaps in between developments, and that's what's lowered the average. So it's just kind of interesting to look at how that has ramped up over the last few years. So we're obviously focusing on it. So.
And the recent study calls for what, 500 units?
500 or so.
Yeah, and we're not talking 20 years.
Yeah, but this is only the affordable.
That was the 3-year short.
That's also more than just affordable. So.
What was the 500 units?
That was a root study.
In a 3-year period, in the 21 through 2024 snapshot period.
Okay, those were more affordable.
So it's just an interesting way to look at these totals.
Sure. So again, we do provide some statistical data on a quarterly basis. Certainly looking
sorry, can I go back to the one you just, the Best Western? Because in your documentation, it's 120 units that will be added. And there are 1,620 people or households that qualify to rent those. And so if you add that into our 569 units and we have 1,600, we have about a third of our, and this all goes back to those metrics that we were talking about in the strategic plan. So about a third, and this may be, I asked here, is it region, is it county, is it city? I don't know. And I think we have to define how we want to be looking at that. That 620 households might be in the region, and that's not where our focus is. Our focus might be just on the county. So we might want to refine those numbers to see what we're really looking at for the county, to know if we are able to house a third of that number, and then we know we could make that better. Because we might be high, if we're just looking at the county and that's a regional number, we might be housing 60%, but I don't know that.
Yeah, down into the details of that number, sure. And so this is just a snippet of some of the data that we've provided over the course of the last probably year or so. But again, just wanted to get a snapshot of the 2019, 2020, and 2021, because I think that's really a period where we've got some uniqueness going on with the pandemic and how that affected our inventory possibly, or other delays within construction, but really also wanted to demonstrate the takeaway of the several larger multifamily projects that did occur, that did actually bring us some units into the inventory, just kind of like what you were talking about. And so in 2019, of course, Rocket Point brought 172 market rate apartments, 36 units in that phase 2 of Lumion phase, 53 units in 2020 at the VOA, 39 units for the hotel conversion at Aspen Village, 24 tiny homes at Escalante Village, and then in 2021, the completion of a Sparrow project too brought 30 units, that 30% out of below
So
supported.
you might have to take the Rocket Points out of that.
So we might have to.
Because the rates that they're charging now, I don't know if they're actually included as being in that, if they're in that same price point. Because they were about $1,500 when those were developed, and now they're in the over 2000s, and so 2,500. So are they still in that, in what we're looking at as qualifying as attainable?
Sure. Well, and I think that takeaway wasn't necessarily intended to just extract affordable or attainable housing.
I was gonna say,
It was more of a broader view in this snapshot perspective.
Just an inventory.
Just kind of an inventory view of some of those larger multifamily projects.
But so Aspen Village is a hotel conversion, so that's affordable. VOA is affordable. Escalante Village, tiny homes were quote unquote theoretically designed to be somewhat attainable. Lumien's affordable. So every single one of those in there is in that range. So where are the developments then that came in that are between the 100 and 120 or 80 and 120? So you see what I'm saying? Is that
Yeah.
It looks like we're talking about only that price range.
But I did like to see that you know, and you do have it in the other ones, like, but the CEOs is interesting because it affects volume.
Yep.
And so it's interesting to see.
Absolutely.
At the same time, even though they are high rent points, to Kim's point.
But they could also change again, like when those other rental properties come on board, are they gonna be able to get $3,000 once the ones in Three
Right.
Springs and, you know, like that,
Makes
they
the
might
same
drop
volume
again.
is helpful.
Yeah, and that's why we need to know that. So
Totally.
we have that trending line. What's available to the people who need it? I agree with you completely. That's our goal, right?
Yeah.
Is to get enough in there so it has a counter pressure.
Well, what's cut off, I see from the Zoom picture there, is 2022, 11 so far in the first quarter. Falling in the category for the single family duplex or townhomes so far for COs.
Awesome.
And the CO is not, or is that under the current residential projects in review list? The CO, I don't know. I guess.
No, I think we're tracking that a little differently than in that particular spreadsheet. We did enhance that in March to sort of break out those status categories. And then I also sorted it so that it was a little more
Yeah, it's really
chronological.
nice the way you sorted it. It's
Um,
very helpful.
Yeah, we added initial contact, which may or may not be applicable. It is skewing those numbers
Yeah.
quite a bit. You know, it's getting us up into that 1,800 range, which
Right,
really
because the
realistically,
480.
we're probably more at the 1,200 range because those are so preliminarily in the initial contact phase. Design and development plan review meeting scheduled approved, which was a critical component, right? So we're tracking if it's going to planning commission, where it's going at with council, under construction being built. And then we take it into that certificate of occupancy and the slide before it does get into that category.
Right. Yeah. So in the approved year, it's looking at 500 range units. So I think it's a really great to know, like you just said, just because there's been contact doesn't mean something's going to happen, right? And sometimes those take a year or more to go through the whole process. So I love what you did here.
Yeah, it's amazing just in, I mean, it's current. I mean.
And it's a team effort. You know, we have lots of planners, Scott, Kevin, the entire team. This is really a collaboration as we continue to figure out what's the most efficient, best way to sort of continue to track.
Right.
And also tie it back to the strategic plan with the performance metrics. And then how do we want to be more transparent and tie that into the website and a dashboard potentially. So
Is there a way, as we're creating this process, that these things go through? Because I know one of the challenges we have is, for rentals particularly, is knowing what they're actually renting for. Is there a way to incorporate a reporting requirement or something in like a building that's a rental that's being managed by?
I have to ask maybe, is she thinking more like, are you market rate or the affordable unit?
Well, for all of them.
For all of them?
Yeah, so we can track that.
You said reporting on what they're charging?
Yeah, so that in the development, you know, when they're going through the planning process, one of the things they have to do is it has to be reported back on an annual basis, what their rate, what their rental rate.
I think we can do that just on our own, and you'd probably be willing to disclose that.
But that's staff time to go out and contact them. If they had to report, you know, if there's a form that they just had to report every year in order to keep their business license or whatever it is, right? Then you would have that information. It wouldn't cost staff time and it would all be easy to something to think about.
Something to chew on.
Right.
We'll think about that.
Because we don't want to make more work for you. We want to automate it, if you will, so that it comes to you instead of you having to go to get it.
Think more about
Eva, it's also really helpful to see the pricing scale on this spreadsheet, the way you've done that as well. So the different ways you've separated it out, it made it really easy to just understand right away. Otherwise, we would have all different colored highlighters guaranteed, so this is really great.
Well, and I noticed that like there's one of them that says mostly market rate, but 16% of the units to be fair share. So they're both attainable workforce and market rate. And then there's one where they're market rate, but they'll be paying a fee. So I see that that's also, even though the units aren't really attainable workforce, the fact that they're paying a transfer fee into the housing program is what's putting them maybe in that category also.
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you kind of have to read the explanation a little bit too.
And the explanation could change, right? So the projects,
time
as they
goes
sort
by,
of,
sure.
yeah, as time goes by.
Yeah.
And I thought that, you know, especially for me, learning in the new role was really helpful to get more up to speed on some of those projects. You know, I didn't have some of that history. And so it's a really good resource tool for myself as well.
Well, for all of us.
For all
all of us, because then we forget.
Yeah. Well, and a lot can change in 3 months. I think that's sort of why we like the quarterly, if that still feels like a good time frame to provide that information. I think it gives us some time too to get through processes and again, getting past that initial contact. Is it making it through?
I think quarterly is good, understanding the work that it takes to update it.
And I know you're going to go into the dashboard, but I just want to, just in case I forget, this is information, all of this, whether the data was there, it may have been, but the information is now useful and the whole, all of staff can use it, we can use it to make good informed decisions. So I'm very excited about this.
Great. So yes, I recently worked on the housing page. And so hopefully you guys had a chance to get a chance to see that. It's really the first step towards, you know, a more vibrant page, you know, as we lead towards the housing dashboard information. It was a priority to make the page more enhanced and illustrate key elements that are driving forces to building the page into a one-stop shop for resourceful, current, and accurate information. As we know, a dashboard will help tell a story and make it easier to understand how the city is progressing against strategic goals, right? Also assisting with regular performance reporting. And I think, again, as we start to track more of the projects, I envision some of that being on there as we develop some of the criteria for the housing incentive program. That'll evolve even more a go-to site for our developers when they're questioning about affordable housing, workforce housing, what are our expectations. All of that information will certainly be there as we move forward and progress. And that's just a snapshot. As we know, Region 9 Economic Data does have a pretty dynamic dashboard on their site. We and Tommy, well actually Tommy and I have engaged with a company that they currently use for that site called Local Intel. Again, real preliminary, just looking at some cost. What is available for customization? What isn't? Do we need to continue to look at some other options for other dashboard platforms too that could be on the page?
So question for you, GDP per capita, is that GDP of the city? Or
This is specifically extracted from their site that I built for the city of Durango.
So when you say GDP, are we talking total revenues of the organization or?
I'd have to find out. Yeah, I did just do a snippet of the picture, so
because it's
I'd be
interesting
happy
that
to
it
look into
peaks.
that.
It peaks and then it drops, and I know our population hasn't increased enough, except I don't know what the X and Y axis is, so I don't know how.
Yeah, I'm sure I can.
And so is this also telling us that there's about 35,500 people employed in the city limits with a population of about 20,000 people? Is that what that's telling us?
I believe so.
So there's about half again as many people come into the city as live here every day for work.
At least a third.
No, because 20,000 people, half again as many come in, so another 10,000. That's amazing. I mean, I knew that was, we've always talked saying things like, well, it doubles every day, but having it be a little bit more accurate, that's really cool.
And then the goal to have it be decreasing that commute, the number of commuters.
Decreasing the number?
Decreasing the number of commuters.
While increasing our population. Otherwise, it means just less people are coming into town.
Yeah, no, while increasing our population by similar rise to the decrease.
So the median household income, is that for a household of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4?
I'll have to find that out, yeah. I guess it doesn't illustrate that there.
I think it's 2, but I'm not certain.
I like the housing page.
Yeah, it's cool.
This on the website is really interesting, the way it has, on the left, the different menu of items. It's great to see that.
Communications team,
Communications team.
really helpful.
Housing
On
plan
Civic
right
Plus.
there, ADU program right there.
Yeah.
It's really great.
I really worked through an outline framework
Yeah.
and then kind of went through all the data points and information. And then Tamara and her team were certainly able to help envision it so that it could come to life and go live, which is great.
It's great even to know it's there too, because it's a great place to refer people. I wonder if there's a section where they can contact you for questions.
Yes, I'm now on there too.
You are, yeah.
So some of the housing initiatives that have been ongoing in the first quarter directly align with the strategic plan and the housing plan objectives, including prioritize density and infill development and create market-friendly policies and regulatory changes. 2 of those that are kind of front and center right now are the initiate housing-related code amendments for the ADU program. We recently just closed that community survey and the ADU owner sort of specific targeted survey that was only hidden and available to those folks. And that closed March 16th. And so we'll be beginning to look through some of that data. I think I shared some of the preliminary findings from some of those results. I think the 2 at the top forefront were over 75% broadly supported for code amendments that promote the construction of new ADUs, and 75% broadly supported for financial incentives for new ADUs if owners commit to offering the units at a reduced rent. So we haven't quite figured out the incentive program sort of yet. We wanted to sort of filter through some of this as well. But I didn't know if council had any thoughts on any ideas around the incentive program. We definitely want to research some communities.
I was gonna say, there's been a bunch when I did filled in for you with Cass, there was a bunch of like studies on.
Sure.
And I don't have that notebook, so I just gotta get one, but I know.
Well, of course, Summit County was front and center for me. So
Yeah, there was
all
like
of
four
that,
or 5 different
information.
communities that were the
Breckenridge.
those, but they would also put in a corner because their ADU program wasn't as forward thinking as ours. And so I think that a lot of communities did things that like 911 just for last year that they won't do again. Does that make sense in terms of incentives?
Yeah,
And
and
so
we've been tossing around some ideas too on just like a pilot program, like a certain portion of the funds. We sort of have some, key criteria components. We do an application basis possibly, go from there and then see what interest we have. And they could develop it further, but really pivot it as a pilot program. Let's see, how much interest we get. Let's see some of those constraints, those kind of things, costs, expenses, what pushback we might get, because folks probably won't want to encumber the ADU with the deed restriction.
It's interesting. I don't know if you guys got the same email I got from the people from Habitat for Humanity, wanting to put together a proposal for the city for how they do their volunteers could actually start addressing meeting some of our needs. So I can see where a funding base like that could. But I'll dig up that email again.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at it. Am I the only one who got it?
no, I got it. And then
Okay.
outreach too.
So one of the things about ADUs, I mean, there's a couple of things about ADUs, but the actual impact that they have. So you say here there's currently 143 legal ADUs in the city, and I think you said last year 1 was added and 7 or something the year before. And then,
Yeah, I'm just looking.
so it doesn't seem like and I know you've looked into this, there's not a huge, like, people knocking on the door to add ADUs. And there's probably several reasons why. It may be that people don't really want ADUs, but it may be that they're too costly. It may be whatever it may be. There could be a lot of reasons for that. And I also found it interesting that you say over 50% of ADU owners who responded stated that their units are offered for rent for less than $1,000 a month. So I'm assuming that means 50.5% or something. It doesn't mean 75% of them are renting for less than 1,000.
I'll have to double check, because Dan was pulling some of the statistical data.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I think he would have said over 70%
Yeah,
if that were the case, but But if you look at the flip side of that, that means that 49% are renting for over $1,000. So if they're renting for $1,100, that's fine. But if they're renting for $2,000, that's different, right? That's different, or $2,500, that might be a different income level capability. So I don't know if that is filtered well enough to actually help us with the impact that ADUs are having on the community. And I would be.
Well, and there was also in that multi-choice question, there was also an option of not renting.
Right.
And so when Dan sort of pulled some of the snippet, that detail isn't pulled necessarily from that question. So I don't want to just assume
Right, 'cause that might have
49% is
lowered
renting,
the rent.
but we may need to look at that a little
Right.
further and see how many folks responded
Not renting.
not renting.
And that added up into the.
And that could add up to
50%,
the.
yeah. So one of the things I think we need to look at and evaluate here is our fiscal responsibility of, if we think we're going to add 10 to 20 ADUs and it takes in staff time and dollars, hundreds of thousands of dollars to create that, is that the best and highest use of our housing dollars? And is it getting the area median income group that we're trying to touch in a home, in a rental, whatever it is, for the kind of money that we're spending in other projects? And that would be my concern. I don't have any problem with focusing on ADUs if fiscally we're doing the right thing.
So the counties were Summit County, Gunnison, and Winter Park. They all had good stories. Most of them was switching them from short-term rentals to long-term rentals. There was one, and I don't remember which one, that talked about we talked about like effects on the community. That I don't remember which county it was, but they were having a lot of like bad renters renting and trash problems and homeowners not picking up when bears knocked over trash. And if so many citations were issued to a short-term rental or a long-term rental, they got their license revoked.
Yeah.
And so just to make sure that you're taking care of your property, you care about who's renting from you, that you care about our community and that sort of thing. You're not just, buying properties to make money.
Thank you for mentioning that, because I really like the switching from monthly rental to.
Yeah, so there was
long-term
incentive,
rental.
and again, a lot of those were like 911, we have to have, monthly rentals for like our winter ski season staff. And so how do we get them? We're gonna give, if you switch over, we're gonna give you $1,000 plus we're gonna give you, what I mean? Like it was like 911 emergency stuff, which I don't know if they'll be doing again.
Well, and I was part of the task force for Summit County.
So there you go.
Center last year.
Yeah.
And also created a program for the town of Frisco called Frisco Housing Locals, where we did another pilot program with a small pool of money, about 50,000, that council delegated to that to offset and try and convert short-term rentals to long-term rentals. The small program in Frisco, what really helped was that I was administering the short-term rental program and running the housing program. So I was communicating with folks on a regular basis and really just started pitching it, trying to get a feel for it. We also did a survey as well, and then kept people kind of on a waiting list. Like, hang tight, we're trying to get this through processes. And within a 3-month period, I was able to secure 14 units to convert just from that communication. But again, it was a small program. It was more around the town being more involved with master leasing. We worked with another management company to administer that program. So it wasn't staff time necessarily, signing the leases and qualifying the buyers and things like that, but it was getting the units to come to the table and backing it with that property management company, and then securing them with the need of a local resident. That was the critical component. And then subsidizing the rent component for a 6 or a 12-month lease. And Summit County looked at the same sort of strategy. And of course, you would get a little more dollars if you did a 12-month lease. And the same thing with Winter Park, really looking to see and get some data, really try and see if you could get folks. And a lot of people came to the program with interest because they had stopped renting during the pandemic.
Right.
And so they realized they weren't getting that revenue stream anymore on these high escalated peak periods, February, March, spring break, President's Day weekend, Martin Luther King weekend, and things like that. And realized they would get that steady revenue stream instead, and didn't have all the expenses of cleaning fees and the deposits and all of those other.
So they did say there was a lot of people that would rather go to the long-term rental, but I also, listening to that program, realized that like we don't have the same sort of dire need that some of these communities do because we're so forward thinking with our short-term rental policies. So I know a lot of it doesn't apply. That's what I was just,
Right.
Right
And
now.
I know that
Yeah.
too. And I think we'll certainly want to mold something that's Durango driven and really.
Is it a one-time incentive or did it need to be an annual?
This is one time, yeah.
And well, there's obviously many different ways you can do it besides just handing out cash, so,
Correct.
we'll leave the creativity to you guys.
With the short-term rentals and the VRBOs, downtown, the midtown section here, it's pretty much unlimited, correct?
You mean Main Street?
Main Street, yeah. Main Street. I mean,
Because you're thinking the Jarvis building.
I'm thinking of all those buildings, and I was thinking that if you were gonna try something, actually building a community of people who live downtown, you might focus on something like that, where there's a high concentration, there's not a cap on the VRBOs and the short terms, and turning that around so you actually get people who live here, who then go out to dinner at night, or, spend money in the community, because they're right there, it's easier to go out and grab something that's making dinner.
And they're not commuting.
Well, the Jarvis building is one,
Jarvis.
that has.
Yeah, I've
that-
walked by it, but I didn't quite know what was
It's a
in.
good
But,
example.
And I'll give the example, I thought I was moving into a community. Right, I live downtown, I thought I was moving into a community where I would get to know people because they'd be out walking their dogs. And what you have is a community of tourists who are staying in accommodations rather than in hotels. So you don't have people who actually live in a significant way, numbers, in a place that would normally be a very vibrant, ideal location, in part because there's no place for them to live. It's all been turned into short term, much of it's been turned into short term. And you're missing out on that, you're missing out on it being a neighborhood in its own identity. Its own vibrancy.
It's true.
Yeah, no, it's.
Have to look around.
And by not putting a cap on downtown, I actually look at it and say, well, why is that treated any differently than any other neighborhood? For most decisions were made, that doesn't mean they can't be revisited, but if you're going to try to incentivize some turnaround, it seems to me you would have the scale by trying to create a community in a place that right now doesn't exist.
The interesting to revisit why those policies were initially made that way, This is an interesting point.
Well, and at the HOA, I'm sure there's an HOA or something. I'm sure.
But anyway, so that's into the details. Shall we
Continue.
I'm sorry, I just don't want to.
So I support incentivizing, funding for incentivizing, I guess is what I would like to make real clear, and for experimentation.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, you're not gonna hit it out of the ballpark with everyone.
Right.
But
But
you
it's
can try.
another piece of the pie to try. It's, maybe like I said, small scale. Dan and I have kind of been talking about that. We'll continue to internally to sort of look at criteria and what that might formulate to. Deed restriction program. Attached in your packet was a simple overview and framework of homegrown Durango. Currently laying the framework and foundation to create a deed restricted program that is the Durango's community's way to ensure that some portion of Durango's housing stock will remain accessible and dedicated to meeting the needs of the local workforce. The program name, if you wondered sort of where that came from, I think I identified, was sprouted through creative collaboration to find a unique way to begin branding the specialized program in a manner that was special and distinctive to Durango and the community. Homegrown Durango will be a separate program from Fair Share, and neither the Fair Share ordinance nor the Fair Share manual will need to be adjusted. There are a variety of mechanisms that will be used to create long-term deed restricted units. To begin, I've identified here on the slide, permanent workforce ownership, local resident occupancy in a rental unit, and sort of laid out some of that framework there. Broadly didn't know if council had any feedback on that program as we continue to look through that. And again, we'll have to draft templates and some other things for those restrictions too.
I think one of the things that we've talked about, I don't know, or at least I've mentioned, I don't know how much we've talked about it, but there may come a time when deed restrictions aren't necessary anymore. And I can see 20 years from now, there might be some negative issues with not allowing, for example, the appreciation of the housing or this or that, or being able to operate as a free market. Because I think our real goal here in the end is to create a market in which the normal market mechanisms satisfy the needs of our mixed income community. And not by regulation, but by free market mechanisms. So I would really encourage us to look at, is there do we want to set these up such that they're revisited at a certain time, or given the metrics of how our community housing is working, would we want to start releasing those numbers? Or it goes from 2% appreciation a year to 5% appreciation a year. Because I don't want our community to end up being seen as a place where you can't buy a home and create equity and wealth as a middle income person. That's not what we want to achieve either. And that's what deed restrictions do. And that's the challenging part of them. It's taxpayer dollars subsidize the ability or incentivize the ability to get people into homes. But after that, at some point when they've quote unquote paid back that incentive by their house hasn't appreciated or whatever, then it becomes a negative connotation to what's going on. So I think we really need to look into the future on this and say, we don't want to become an area where middle income people don't move now, not because they can't afford it, but because they can't create wealth with the #1 wealth building mechanism in the United States, which is your home.
I will say, one of the things I've had to go through in Summit County that I bring here is that we have revisited covenants over time. I think I've mentioned before, just firsthand experience, the first property that I purchased was a deed restricted unit in 2006. And at that time, it actually had pretty strict black and white, had to work 32 hours a week, couldn't do the remote work, couldn't really be self-employed at the time, had a 5% appreciation cap back then, which was kind of unheard of. And it's not a guarantee. Real estate market's never really a guarantee with that appreciation cap. And so one of the things that some of the communities have looked at is creating new covenants and allowing folks to opt in into another covenant. Has pros and cons, certainly for sure. But some of those covenants where they were very heavily restricted on the lesser than of the area median income or 3%, whichever appreciated lesser, really plateaued folks to not making any kind of wealth or gaining equity. And so really those amended covenants allowed folks to opt in and allow appreciation and allow growth and allow the resale and not be stuck in a unit, not feel like they couldn't move on into something else or have to leave the area, right? Just sell their unit and move out. But I'm listening.
Yeah, and I'm not talking about the current, like, you're kind of looking at this, like you mentioned in the transfer fee, revisiting in 10 years how the council can see the money might be used. And that's the kind of thing I'm hoping that we're not writing deed restrictions in such a way that they can't be changed if the situation changes. That's what I'm just wanted to ensure that part of it.
And is this administered through a lottery?
Potentially. We haven't quite
Santa
figured
Barbara,
out.
that's how they do it.
Yes, oftentimes there becomes a wait list. Folks get qualified, they go through the home buyer class. And we're still working through some of that with some of our stakeholder partners to kind of develop what that administration will look like and what a lottery would look like.
And I would encourage us doing it on a point system, so that if we find that 90% of our police officers are living outside of a 20-mile range from the city, that police officers applying for the lottery receive more points.
Or teachers.
Or teachers, or whatever the critical need is at the time. Because I would hate, someone who just moved here, or I don't know, those core services that we need, the people who supply the benefit to our community, I think we need to recognize that.
And like Telluride has the requirements, you have to live so many years, you have to be working. But also for the aging population, you get to also retire in place. If you've been here and worked so many years, but now you want to, you need, so there's a lot of.
That's in the documentation that you've given us, yeah, that's the case. But we don't have, and we haven't talked anything about a point system for allowing us to meet the actual needs of our community.
I think this feels a good week for us, because I think we have some deed restricted units, but not that many in Durango, and so I'm happy to see you looking at this and being creative around it, thinking about it. I'm putting it on here.
2022 work plan look ahead priorities. In January, I provided the annual update. I think I've been here about 4 weeks, so that was a good opportunity for me to get up to speed pretty quickly on moving parts and also diving into that fair share program. I think one of the things that's come up more recently was the House Bill 21-1117 inclusionary zoning that was signed into the new law in May of 21. I did have to look at that to find out exactly when that got signed. We still want to research and look at other communities for best practices, right? What's worked, what hasn't worked. Plan to begin drafting in-house revisions soon as we continue to dive into some of that research and find out more information, especially Telluride. I really want to look into that since they were the case law study. I'd like to kind of see if they've dove into that. Glenwood Springs.
This is the law that applies it to rental units.
Correct.
I just want to make certain everybody
Thank
is
you.
aware of that, which we still are not using as in our efforts to.
Right. But I can assure you, we understand it's a priority and we're going to start to work on that as well. I also want to look into Glenwood Springs. They actually put theirs into their land use development code. Then they didn't do enough outreach, at least my understanding, and got a lot of pushback from their building association development community. So they pulled it out. And then they've recently tried to put it back in and revisit as voluntary. So again, I want to do a little more research on some communities to kind of see again best practices and continue working.
What doesn't work.
And what works and what doesn't work. And continue working with the existing fair share program and new and creative ways to help learn what should be included in a revised fair share proposal. Another takeaway, I think important to note, however, poorly crafted inclusionary zoning ordinances can have negative side effects on housing production and can alienate critical privacy of partners. We want to do it right. We want to make sure we do it right. So we're going to work on this. It is a priority. I can't say for sure how much time this might take, but we might need to get some legal perspective too, and kind of work with Dirk or someone, you know, as a consultant to sort of see what else we can get out of that for sure. The housing incentive program, creating policy as well as those initiatives to move forward. Staff is looking at the ADU survey results and takeaways from lessons learned to help inform and shape policy criteria, as well as I mentioned that goal to advances following initiatives, including the ADU development, multiplex rehabilitation and infrastructure support opportunities. We have learned a little bit in this first quarter, right? The Gage Apartments was a good example for us, but again, not the only one that as we move forward, learning lessons on some of that infrastructure support. Takeaway again, that three-prong approach to directly support the creation of housing units for the local
Question. I'm going to wait to see what you go out, and if it's something different, then I'll raise my question.
It's probably going to be something different.
Yes. Okay. So this is a lot, and I appreciate the multiple approach you're taking. I am wondering, going back to Jennifer's comments about being able to cast on what's different communities done, and maybe Melissa, this also goes back to CML. There was a huge effort, and I think there'll be another one this coming year, to look at fees around second home ownership, the impact of that, and issues around short-term rentals, licensing of that, or reduction of the number of permits provided. And I think that's a broader area as well. I think you have to focus on where the quick wins are. I see that. I was wondering if you envisioned some of that year's time being spent on that kind of.
So the most recent CML newsletter talks about ballot measures that are going to be on in November, and a couple of them are tax measures for short-term rentals that the community would vote on. There were a couple of things like that in there. So to your point, that might be something to discuss for this November and next November.
Well, we missed it last year as considering it because it's by August, middle like August 18th or something. And then the bigger issue is homes that are truly used as VRBOs then being taxed at property tax rates of commercial. You can't have it both ways.
That's at a state level.
That's at a state level, right? So that's more
It's a big one.
us.
Yeah.
But I do think if we're looking at, as many communities are, again, coming back with another ballot measure, then that's something that we need to be thinking about now.
Other one wasn't just a tax in the sense of the sales tax, it was also property tax, mill levy increase that the city would put on second homes also, second homes and short-term rentals. Because that, that's another way for us to, and I'm sure that the community could support that if they wanted to or not. So.
Well, yes, to answer your question, I certainly keep up and abroad of all of these moving parts and components. It's again, I think trying to find balance. We want to get tangible impacts. We want to get units. We want to get things in the ground. We're still working with the division to try and get more efficiencies streamlined, trying to get these foundational and things laid out. But yes, I definitely envision
The language would need to be developed and approved by council by August.
for a ballot question.
I believe that's the date, because we missed it last year. And that's late. That's late.
Right, because it has to go to the clerk and then.
One has to go to the community.
And the community. Yeah.
So you just need, those windows of opportunity to make systemic change.
The other question I had about short-term rentals is, so we define short-term rentals as less than 30 days. What if we changed our definition to less than 3 months? Because during COVID, what happened was a lot of people, and I know there was something in the paper too about this just recently, were renting month by month, 29 days to get away from the rules so that they could stay here 3 months and still do that.
And then still utilize the property on the off term that it's not occupied by.
Right. So, well, yeah. So do we want to redefine what short-term rentals are in the city of Durango?
Does every community have their own definition, or is it like standard,
Well, we have a definition for short-term rental.
No, I know, I just didn't know
No,
if everyone else
I
like
don't
had
know,
the
but
same or.
But I know so it hasn't really come up as a big problem until COVID. At least that's my understanding, what the other communities were seeing, and in resort towns also, they were seeing this change because COVID, people wanted to get out of the cities for more than 29 days or whatever. They wanted to stay for 2 or 3 months. And so they were starting to circumvent the regulations in order to achieve that. So it may be a really new phenomenon in that sense.
Well, and I've seen it too in other communities where they're diverting around the rules and regulations of not getting a license by saying, well, I blocked my calendar out for more than 30 days and you can't really track who's in my property because I'm not using it less than 30 days, things like that.
And you could get around the idea that someone locally might need to rent something for 2 months by saying, if you're not employed here, you have it's less than 3 months. But if you're employed here, you can rent something for 2 months, transition from one place to another. Get around that.
We're not without opinions on housing.
We're just offering suggestions and ideas and thoughts and concepts to think about. What we get paid for, right?
Right.
It's 14 minutes.
Okay.
13 minutes. We might be willing to give you an extra few.
Okay, well, we'll dive into development opportunities. One of the sort of near-term things that have sort of come my way as I've been in the new position is attending bi-weekly meetings with the Twin Buttes development team and our internal staff. And Twin Buttes is actually here as well, and some on the phone. But they've identified a new parcel for potentially land donation and including that 1% transfer fee to meet the housing compliance obligation through that. And by donation of that land parcel that currently houses the Animas High School parcel. So something new here that hasn't been looked at before. The staff report really just laid out some real preliminary details about the parcel, the 3.284 acres located there right off of 160. Currently, the high school plans to vacate the property, I believe, probably July of 2023. Site plan work could begin fairly quickly if the prospective developer was identified. Site is essentially shovel ready and is fully served with adequate water, sewer, access for higher density residential if desired. an upgrade, as we like to call it, from the other previous parcel. Yields real potential for unit density, flat buildable parcel. There's an entry road access already, emergency access across there, internal utilities as well.
What's the potential density?
I think just preliminarily, it's about 24 units per acre.
And how many acres? Three?
Okay.
May not yield that.
It may not yield that high.
So
but
let's
I
just say
think
20 is maybe a rough estimate.
So we do some development analysis.
It's not three, but it's a significant number as well.
But it would be a significant number compared to the other parcels.
Okay.
And really just wanting to get some feedback while they're here. I know time sensitive on some things, but I could certainly go through some of those other details that are in the staff report. The 1% transfer fee, I did suggest a couple of options there. Revenues from Twin Buttes are currently unrestricted. We could look at something around that 10-year time frame and then reevaluate it. Future collections could continue to go towards meeting housing goals, or a portion, like half and half. We could look at, in no case shall 50% is what we recommend be less than that for housing. So certainly not going below that. But broadly based, looking at the parcel on council's strategic plan, housing goals and vision, including adding affordable units to inventory, land banking donation to take advantage of that, and the 1% transfer fee revenue from home sales, this preliminary concept and proposal is shaping up to align better than other proposals have in the past to increase units in the housing spectrum and have impactful results on the local housing landscape. Staff would like to get feedback from council today on this initial goals.
I think I agree. The potential from the previous conversation that we had is, I think it's come a long way. And it's a great use of the land that's going to be vacated, and the timing is wonderful in that sense. The timing is everything. The only concern I have really right now is that it's isolated from the Twin Buttes community. So it's isolating the mixed income. You know, it's not helping to create that mixed income area. That's my only concern, and I'm not certain that's it.
Just throw a couple of extra thoughts in here. So we're talking about up to 24 units an acre, so fairly dense, 3 acres plus. The road that's the eastern entrance into the development goes straight up into the development. Straight north of here will be part of the next phase of the village. There'll be a village center
across
just
the
north,
road?
yeah, and up. There's also a hard surface trail that will run right through this parcel and up right into the heart of the existing development. So yes, it is a little bit isolated in terms of mixing unit types, but we don't even know what we will put here yet.
Right.
So it could be a mix of units.
I was gonna say with 75 units, potentially you could have higher and lower
Right,
and have a mix
So
within those.
those are the kind of things that Igor and the team will work through as time and with the Twin Buttes folks.
So to make sure I understand it, across the road from this current green parcel
Straight
will
up
be
to-
developed.
Yes.
No, directly across the road will be developed.
There's a little bit of a elevation change, so it's above the road. You can kind of see where there's
Currently,
Yeah,
where there's
the
buildings.
development, it's right up there, yeah.
Okay.
So they would enter from a different location.
Well, they're coming in
Okay.
from the east entrance, which you can see it runs right into the Zoom box or the Zoom box here. You don't see it tie into the highway, but the hard surface trail will be right at the highway along the road. The trail comes right through the development and goes straight up and goes on to what you see that road heading to the west, takes you back into development. So I think there'll be better integration than the site
Than it
shows
appears,
right now.
yeah.
Cool. I'm fully supportive of it.
Yeah, I think it's a great location too, as far as access. It's really easy access to 160 and flat. It's a great piece of property. Timing's really good.
Utilities and.
So if I could just maybe one more thought here. So the idea here is let's get some feedback. You might remember when I was before you, February of 21, year plus ago. What we'd like to do is come back with a draft compliance agreement for consideration. Once we kind of check the box on this thing, and then have memorialize all of this so that we know this parcel is coming to the city. We'll be using transfer fees along with probably other revenues to do some pre-development when the time is right. But kind of move that direction. Relieve Twin Buttes of the uncertainty associated with this issue.
Yeah.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, I don't know if the bus line goes up there yet, but maybe we'd have to change that.
Yeah, that's great.
Does it go all the way up there?
It goes, or at
Oh,
least
my
across the
damn.
street
What's
to
across
there.
the street?
Guys, those units across the street, it goes there, so it would have to go to that.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
And if not, we would.
Yeah.
I think it does
Yeah.
because Anna's students were up there, or are up there. So,
Yeah.
That's great. Opportunity. Thank you again for being creative and keeping an open. This was an interesting mind to that.
Yes, this is an interesting one too. So the city of Durango, as we know, currently owns several properties that may have future development. Most of these parcels have been evaluated in the past and analyzed for city council to see what potential and what challenges and complexities each site might entail if they were to be developed. I've prioritized just a few for us today, not necessarily that I'm recommending housing, but again, just we did another initial look at those and wanted to bring them before you. The parcels at Florida Road in particular, there is a potential adjacent landowner, potential developer, who has inquired and reached out to the city. And as we mentioned before, to create housing, especially affordable housing, often requires strategic development and collaborative partnerships, public and private, to achieve successful results. The developer is seeking to combine the city's underutilized and blighted city properties located at 1494, 1500, and 1530 Florida Road, along with his adjacent properties for a combined total of approximately 7 acres of developable property. We're still working through some of those preliminary details, but he did allow us to share some of those within the staff report. While the existing zoning will allow for greater density, the developer plans to add a rich set of amenities to build a true community, not simply housing. Let's see.
Is where the U is the center part in there, is that also land owned by this developer, or will the development just surround that piece of property?
So we've been talking with this gentleman for a number of months. And he's been essentially collecting adjacent parcels, and I'm not exactly sure where he is as of this week, but he had collected, I think, 3 of the parcels that were adjacent. We've done some preliminary scoping on ideas, and I'll just say that this is the property that was acquired in the early 2000s for extension of Jenkins Ranch Road. Obviously, the road is more in alignment with this red, not really quite like that, but essentially that's what it would be if that road were ever extended. It isn't a major street impact study. It was envisioned as a reliever for Jenkins Ranch Road. I think the dynamics have changed in 20 years in regard to what Jenkins Ranch Road and Skyridge looks like. Certainly, there's some residents up in that vicinity on that other end. So there's still a question, will we ever build that road? Well, we don't have an answer to that today. But what we did do is say, well, if there was to be a road here, could you build around the area that's needed for the road, or use the road alignment as where you would build on? And while it's only been conceptual level at this point, we've had conversations with him, with staff, with the engineering planning, and it appears that it's possibly something that could work. Obviously, this is city-owned property that we invested in a couple decades ago. So a lot of work to be done here, but I think this is an area that we're constantly getting calls on. If you drive past here, it looks super low density. It looks a little bit like past its useful life. So I think staff has been enthusiastic, I guess is the word, about trying to find some solutions here.
Yeah.
Cool.
Seems like a great location. I would agree that it's very low density in that area.
Yeah.
I think it would be really helpful to the businesses around there too, to have more residents.
I want to make sure we have time, we're going to cover Mason Center, right? I just want to make sure we don't shortchange that.
So good point. Do we want to add 10 more minutes onto our conversation?
I would like to hear Mason Center.
So if we had to go 10 more minutes, so we comfortable with that? Okay, good.
Okay, so for takeaway, at least on Florida, are we good to continue to
Yes.
plug away with that? Okay, thank you. Mason Center. This was learning for me on this parcel. I didn't know some of the complexities and things around it. I worked a lot with staff to sort of get up to speed on some of those components. The staff report sort of laid out some of the, what I would say are challenges around housing on the site, certainly cost potentially prohibitive, around affordable. I think just because of the sheer nature of the site, the topography on the northeastern corners, you can kind of see with the yellow lines to the right-hand corner there. The historic overlay, I got to learn more about that too. I wasn't as familiar with that, so it was good. It was good for me to sort of work with Vicki internally and understanding that. I also had to learn through Touré's department the adopted master plan for parks, open space, trails, and rec from January 2020 that identifies a level of service and calls out for the necessity of park space, sort of in that region. We also talked and collaborated, and our residents have embraced it as a park space potentially, which may or may not align with housing there. I think I might need some help too on some of that.
Well, you continue if you want. I can
Okay.
jump in as necessary.
Okay, so planning staff has not completed an in-depth review for this report, but it provided the following preliminary information to consider. On the non-historic east side of the park, medium density 12 units per acre potentially could go there. Currently can't do condos or townhomes in the zone district, and it's currently not even zoned for residential. I think when we look at the code, it's only for elderly or permanent supportive housing. Right now it is allowed. Identify the hillside topography challenges. Engineering's identified some additional complexities. I think preliminarily we looked at 5 duplexes and 3 single-family homes, but wanting to get some feedback on if this is the best and highest use for the parcel.
You looked at 5 duplexes and what?
3 single-family homes.
So I would like to just throw out, first of all, a park and neighborhoods. You walk through it, south side of Durango, which is probably a lower income neighborhood. There's maybe one park, Mantle Park. That's it. And that's a school park, if you think about it. So I also would say that there's Buckley Park in this neighborhood. So I want to lay this out. If we think about our equitable distribution of our resources, you've got a large neighborhood with one facility that's basically used by the school. And so I do want to make clear that we really do need to think about what is its use. And I come back to say, wow, if we could get 5 duplexes in, and I could get 4 police officers who don't have to commute from New Mexico to come to work, that's a win. Wherever we can put those stuff. And I use that as an example, Chief, because I'm aware of some of the, but you could switch it out for school teachers, you could switch it out for any group of people, restaurant workers, whoever it is. That's 10 families.
So it's interesting because for me, as the use, I know we can change these things, but the use is public or public facilities or infrastructure. And that immediately made my mind go to, well, suppose the city developed that for use for public employees to be housed in.
Mm-hmm.
And that was one of the ways that we've been asking all the employers to contribute to providing housing. Maybe that's one way we could do that and still fall within the public facilities concept. And as far as developability and the topography, the lot that my house was built on had much more challenging topography than any area here. And yes, that's a consideration, but it's not a defining factor. I do believe that the defining factors will probably have to do more with the acceptability of the community around it to having housing there versus a full park. But I also agree we do have Buckley and I don't like the idea. I don't like it when people say, I bought my home and now no one else can build here. That bothers me. And if what we want to have is a vibrant community, we're going to have to accept some trade-offs. I think, who was it that they actually sent us a pretty good email about that recently, about how if we want to have this viable, vital community, we're going to have things like denser housing. And if we don't want more traffic from people coming in from outside, we're going to want to house them within our community so that the traffic doesn't increase. So I personally like the idea of pursuing what can be done with this property. I absolutely don't think the highest and best use of it is to have a storage facility, Parks and Rec parked in the center of it. Now, even if it goes all to park, that's got to go away. That could go somewhere much different. So,
Could I add a couple more comments?
Yeah.
We're standing on top of it. So the building itself, that was a school, obviously wasn't being used for park purposes, really. I mean, Parks and Rec used it for storage, classes and that sort of thing. But when the park plan was done a couple of years ago, they did a level of service spatial analysis, and it's called equity mapping, but it's really not equity mapping the way was what you're thinking about equity mapping. And so I won't call it that, but spatially analyzing level of service in neighborhoods. And this was identified as a park, and it was identified as a need for the neighborhood, excluding the square footage of that school footprint. But it still met the level of service for a neighborhood park for this neighborhood. So why that I think is important is an adopted plan of the city council. And while I will defer to the city attorney on this, we've had this conversation a number of times of how can we and can we dispose of parkland for other purposes. And
but to that point, Kevin, the building that was there before,
right.
We're not saying the footprint has to be any bigger than any of the building that was there before necessarily.
No.
So the park still remains, and it's no less of a park if you build where we just tore buildings down. So I'm not following how that works.
I didn't really maybe get to finish. The reason I called out that square footage and excluded it was because of that purpose. It wasn't included in the analysis, but the rest of the park space was. I think we'd be very challenged, and we can certainly spend resources to have someone design something up here. I think what you'll find is where you see that black line, it probably largely will be consumed by driveways and garages, and then utilities. The tree issue is obviously one we didn't call out. Right. We all know about trees in neighborhoods and concern about removal of trees. I just find it will be challenging here, and not to say we can't go down this path. I think you'll find it challenging with the neighborhood as well. And I don't live immediately near this park, and I don't have kids, so I don't really use the park. But and I think you're pretty close.
I live a block away.
So you probably see what's going on over there.
Yeah, I see it all the time.
As green space, and I think it's been embraced by the community. Not to say we can't continue to evaluate it. We can. And I know Terry is going to be here in a couple of weeks or so to talk about alternative ways to see it as a park.
Good, because that was going to be my next question was, if it's not going to be used for housing, it's really not a very well designed park.
I was gonna say the main little area, that one little square is the majority of the park. The whole back area isn't really utilized.
Never. When they cleaned it up after building out, I think it was a specific direction of the administration at the time. Is don't go to the neighbors and say, how do you want this to be a park? Just stabilize it. And that's what largely has happened. I think there's been a couple of trees planted. And then obviously they cleaned up that building, which Terry will talk about alternatives for that building, including its removal entirely.
I would like to just go through the process with you and Turi and like see the potential and like what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, if we have to put an alley in that black dotted line, if there's parking, if it's financially doesn't make sense to build in that corner, like all those things. If it doesn't make sense, then it doesn't make sense, and through the process, we'll figure that out. And so I think that is what I would just like to encourage. Like, let's go through the process. Can we get some affordable units and a park? Like, yeah, we can, the best of both worlds and find that common ground, great. But if not, then okay.
And we can do that analysis in that point on the, can you dispose of it? I think that's the question that needs to be addressed as part of this evaluation. Not to say it can or it can't, but
can dispose of what?
Well, essentially, I think the footprint of that school is probably less than half of that whole, half of the school, where the black line to the east is. And so if a portion of it was recognized as parkland before, can it not be recognized that way in the future?
So I would just like to add, I watched the Manizoni, what was the
Manicozy.
Anybody else watch that?
Manicozy.
Yes, I
I'm going
did.
to. I haven't had
Yeah.
time.
I did.
So, you know, he talks about unused parks or not maximized and really combining things to, you know, he uses a variety of examples, you know, the track on top of the building, you know, and everything else. But I look at it and I say, I'm not suggesting you remove, it become without green space, but there were buildings there before, that were used there. We had a housing shortage, a significant housing shortage. And Kim, I actually like your idea of a public, you know, the city focusing on something for helping our workforce in some way, shape, or form. Kind of, we're asking the development community to do it, and here's a chance for us to have a demonstration project as well. And I think it's really important also to have it be mixed income in that neighborhood, right? So I think there's a lot of opportunities, to your point. So let's see what could work and what the obstacles, but let's not rule it out.
So we have an architect that is working on some potential park alternatives, and there was also kind of an add alternate to his work, which would include some house, kind of very conceptual level, rather than us just kind of cherry picking a picture off of that and plot it on there a little bit more.
I think single family homes is not the way to go for this development. Personally, I would encourage us to do.
Can I ask a question for Kevin? Can you tell me more about the park consultant? I'm interested in knowing more about that.
Park consultant.
You said we have a park
No,
consultant.
we essentially want an architect who will
an
do some
architect.
design concept level drawings, just to give you a picture of what either revisioned park is or housing on this site. And just because of timing and circumstances, we don't have that today. But again, Turi is going to be back, I believe, is end of next month or beginning of next week, or May 3rd, in which we can bring all of that back to the table.
Awesome.
Would you want to see in the renderings the multifamily?
Could I also ask about the assisted living? Did you say assisted
Senior housing, that's another.
I mean, that's a need in this community as well. I mean, let's look at it. We've got folks that where are they gonna age in place in some way. So I think there's some public good that can come from this public asset.
I definitely, I'm willing to look at some of the public good that may be able to come from it. On the portion that had a house, the building before, the space that we have currently as park, I personally think it would be a shame to lose that green space in Durango. It's well used. I see people using it all the time, and we just, regardless of comparing neighborhoods, we have green space here. I really want to keep the green space that we have green, because we don't have much in
We can
Durango.
calculate the level of service so we understand how it impacts what was in the park plan that was adopted by council, so it's not inconsistent, so you guys know.
And eventually I'd like to know which communities don't have service.
And we back into the parks and rec plan has mapping in there.
Yeah.
That you can see where it says it's short from a spatial distribution standpoint per capita.
Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I want to be clear. I don't think anyone's suggesting we eliminate green space.
We've gotten past our extra 10 minutes. What do we want to do? What more?
No, but you said there's Buckley Park in the neighborhood.
There is.
And so I guess my point is, I don't underestimate the value of this park.
Oh, I see it used as well.
Yeah, like,
But I'm also pointing out that we have whole neighborhoods that don't have anything.
right, but my point too remains that my belief is that we have so little green space that we don't try to make equal to the lesser good. I'd say we save what green we have throughout Durango. That includes Fanto Park, that includes, the parks throughout the neighborhoods in Durango that we have. I appreciate them very much. I see them being very well used.
The entire boulevard, middle strip is a green space that if it were.
Okay, let me
Let me finish. Because we have problems with the elm trees there. And if we redid that entire median, I see people running there all the time. I see people doing all sorts of stuff with their dogs there. We could create park space all the way down East Third Avenue. So we're limiting ourselves and not looking at the bigger picture. Is all I'm saying.
I'm just saying my opinion is that this space with Mason Center, I value a lot.
We're not
And I'm receiving a lot of feedback from community members who also value it heavily. And I just want to have that
And I
my
agree
voice
that
being heard.
Buckley Park is right there, but I will also agree that as a mom with 2 young kids that I raise here, we use this park 10 times more than we use Buckley Park when my kids were little because of the playground and like
Same
the other
with me.
things there.
Same
And so
with me.
I agree and I value, and I don't think we should get rid of any green space, but also highest and best use, so. I mean,
There were
and
two,
everybody's,
there's a
yes.
building there now and there was another building before, so.
No, I absolutely agree with you,
Entitled
Melissa,
to
that
their
the
own.
area that's green should, on the left-hand side there is prime for staying green. I
Yeah.
absolutely agree with that.
I just wanted to clarify that just through this conversation, so.
So where do we want to go from here? Do we have a lot more?
I think I only had, I just had the library lot, but again, I think, the parking division is seeking to complete a comprehensive parking management plan study. I don't know if it was gonna encompass this or if it's just on the main,
I have to give Sarah. on the
you'd have to
parking
find
side.
out,
She's
so.
out.
But we could, when we have more time, we could come back
Sure.
with this ourselves, I think.
Just one comment, development does not include parking. You can develop over parking, so. Just-
This was a lot of.
Any other comments on the housing presentation? So, once again, every department that we have in the organization has done some amazing additions to what they do and added value to our community. I am so excited. We've got open drive, we have a housing division. We have things within all the other departments that may not be so obvious. In the police department, we've got the access and the imaging. So I just want to say how much I appreciate that we're really adding value to our. All righty, meeting
Thank you
adjourned.
so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.
You're on your way, Dr. Russell.
Yes.
Sure.
Sound